I call to order the Oswego Community Unit School District Board of Education meeting. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Doyle?
Present.
Mr. Gatewood?
Present.
Mrs. Johnson?
Present.
Mrs. Kroner?
Here.
Dr. Marino?
Present.
Mrs. Simulton?
Present.
Mrs. Swanson?
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, item 4.1 is Pride Award recipients. And tonight I'm pleased to announce that we are starting the process of acknowledging our monthly Pride, proudly recognizing individuals demonstrating excellence award winners in person. So board, I'm going to ask you to join me, and we're gonna get in a single file line facing the outside in front of the speakers, okay? And Teresa, you want to go ahead and start?
You got it. So tonight, the Board of Education acknowledges our November Pride Recognition winners. As Dr. Sparlin stated, it stands for proudly recognizing individuals demonstrating excellence. The Board of Education implemented this program in the fall of 2015 to recognize, promote, and celebrate the many contributions made by teachers and employees across the district. This year, our district has an open nomination process inviting anyone to nominate teachers and employees. We thank our generous district partners, Allied First Bank, Chick-fil-A, Huntington Learning Center, and Culver's for helping to make this program a success. Awardees, as your name is called, please make your way up to the stage to be congratulated by the board and Dr. Sparlin. Please hold all applause until the end of each category. The first awardees are the Teachers of the Month, sponsored by Allied First Bank. What teachers do day in and day out is vital to the success of our students. They plant the seeds of learning and help our students to grow. These two teachers have been named our November Teachers of the Month. First is Allison Abels from Oswego High School. And our second teacher is Miriam Osich from Boulder Hill Elementary School. Congratulations to these two teachers. The next awardee category is our Employees of the Month. This is co-sponsored by both Chick-fil-A and Huntington Learning Center. This award is given in appreciation of each employee's ability to not only go above and beyond, but also for their ability to reflect the true meaning of service. Our two employees that have been named as November Employees of the Month are Keith Mecklenburg from the Transition Pathways Program, who's unable to join us this evening, and Sue Roche from Oswego East High School. Congratulations. At this time, if there's any building administrators with us this evening from these schools, you're welcome to join. And board members, if you could please make your way over to the edge of the stage here, we'll do a photo with our winners. And a reminder for everyone else, we invite you to consider nominating a teacher or employee for this special recognition. You can do so on our website at sd308.org/pride. Thank you and congratulations to all of our November Pride winners.
Thank you. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I need some hot chocolate.
Okay, item 4.2. Each year on November 15th marks the official statewide observance of School Board Members Day in Illinois. Nearly 6,000 people serve on the local school boards in Illinois across 850 school districts that serve almost 2 million students in our public schools in Illinois. On behalf of our administration, our staff, and our community, I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for your commitment in the governance of our school district. Many people have no idea in regards to the number of hours, evening events that you put in on a weekly basis. You spend countless hours working in committees, attending board meetings, and pouring over thousands of reports each week on an annual basis, and you do it all for no money. But you do it as a service to our community and to ensure that the students of our school district are getting the best educational experience that we can provide. You work to ensure that the opportunities offered by the district are equitable for all, and that we are educating all students to reach their highest potential. So tonight we say thank you for putting others before self. Your work and service are most appreciated, probably more than you know. So again, thank you for your service as board members to School District 308. Yes.
Thank you. 5.1, public comment. On behalf of the Board of Education, I would like to thank the public for attending tonight's meeting. We value the feedback we receive from our residents and encourage everyone to take an active interest in their public school system. Residents interested in speaking to the board this evening are asked to have completed a comment card and presented it to the secretary to the board. When the secretary calls your name, I ask that you come to the microphone, state your name for the public record, and provide your feedback. Please note that comments are limited to 3 minutes per person for a total of 30 minutes. No discussion of personnel matters or responses to questions are permitted. The board does not participate in discussion during public comment. If your questions or concerns require follow-up, a member of the administration will reach out through the contact information provided on the comment card. Thank you.
Dallas Shivari.
Can I please pass this up there so y'all can look at it while I speak, please? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Dallas Shivari. 308 board members, you are now holding a piece of artwork that was drawn by a former 308 student. This was a college assignment that was recently completed by a 308 graduate student who carries these memoirs forward into her pre-adulthood. The student did reach out while being bullied, and nothing ever was done. Worse still, some administration observed the bullying firsthand and looked away. This is why I'm here tonight. I'm speaking out for these students. Recently, a 308 mother reached out to the community asking other parents if their child had ever been bullied with no type of communication to the parent after the incident had occurred. As a 308 mom, I am appalled. There are several I'm a little nervous, so please excuse me. I was appalled that there were several responses from other parents who were never notified by the school. This is absolutely unacceptable. The students of this district need to feel that school is a safe place. Multiple quarantines, ridiculous mask mandates, and the so-called online learning that students continued to endure last year to now leaves a population of students silently struggling. In less than 3 months, the Chicagoland area has lost 10 children to suicide. 10! Recently, one of those children called Oswego home. A student in our very own district. One suicide death is too many, and 10 is alarming, and in my opinion should be declared as an emergency. The bullying from this district with its nonsensical rules, social media pressures, cyberbullying, and other student bullying must be addressed before one more child becomes a victim. I ask you to turn to each other and answer this question. When will the emotional and mental health of our students start to be a priority? When will this board take accountable actions and demand changes to better addressing bullying? Please look at that photo one more time and understand that that picture tells a story. Characteristics of these actions must be identified and resolved. Our children deserve your help. Thank you. May I please have that back when you're done.
Thank you. Tom Nenninger.
Tom Nanninga. I'm going to read really fast because it's exactly 3 minutes. Good evening. CRT being taught to our children is a huge issue and an area of concern in our community and around the country. Parents are being called to thousands of school districts, including here. But don't worry, I am told in my response to the FOIA that I filed, currently we are using this vendor for their bank of questions to design our own surveys. There has been no teacher or student use of this product. And I have to wonder if the word yet is missing from this response, because who will ultimately be asked the questions in the surveys that you develop from the bank of Panorama's questions? That answer to me is obvious, our students and or our staff. The district committed to a contract for a cost of $14,300 per year. So nothing to see here. Sounds like the June newsletter that was sent out to the community telling the parents there was nothing to worry about. The parents that were questioning if CRT was being taught seemed confused and everything is okay now. Wrong. I think it's becoming clearer and clearer each day that steps are being taken to introduce critical race theory into the language of all subjects being taught. Adam Andruski of Forbes magazine wrote an interesting story on October 12th about Panorama Education and their ties to the Attorney General and to the true intent of what they are selling to school districts. Here are 3 direct quotes from that story. The first quote, critical race theory usually teaches that America, its supporters, and her institutions are inherently racist and discriminatory, and that race is used as a social construct to oppress and exploit people of color. The second quote from the story, while the company doesn't use the term critical race theory on its website, Azra Nomani of Parents Defending Education, an anti-CRT parent group at the forefront of recent protests, claims that Panorama Education is using data collection as a pretext for school officials to push controversial ideas about race, identity, and sexuality. And the final quote from the story, Panorama sells surveys to school districts across the country that focus on the local, social, and emotional climate. These surveys are then used as justification for new curriculum from other providers that some parents call critical race theory and find objectionable. Let's quickly go back to my FOIA response from the district. Currently, we are using this vendor for their bank of questions to design our own surveys. Surveys. Saying CRT is not a class in our curriculum is a true statement, but it is becoming harder and harder for me and other parents to believe that CRT is not being interwoven into every class being taught. A recent FOIA uncovered books titled Anti-Racist Baby, White Fragility, Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism, and You are being added to several of our elementary school libraries. We have much larger issues with the mental health of our children than wrecking their minds with these gross, untrue aspects of critical race theory. Let's not waste more time filling their heads and instead teaching them how to read, write, do math proficiently, and learn the real history of our nation and the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Ariane Amapur.
Can you hear me? I was going to talk about something else, but literally none of that matters anymore. I would just like to say that I went to law school, and in law schools are the only places in this country where critical race theory is being taught. And it is an optional class in, I believe, 90 to 95% of law schools in this country, where it is taught that students take a different perspective on the laws and histories of this country, to look at America through the lens of the narrative of race. As the gentleman over there mentioned, CRT, or critical race theory, is not being taught in schools, and it is not being taught to children as they try to read, write, and do math proficiently. But let's assume it was. Let's assume that in this country, in elementary and black neighbors. What is wrong with teaching our kids to acknowledge the horrific history that black people and brown people and pretty much any other person who is not a straight white man in this country has gone through? And what is wrong with acknowledging that and acknowledging there are steps every one of us can take to heal those scars, to become one nation indivisible? I would just like to say that the ridiculous narrative around CRT in this country has poisoned the public debate. And it is hurting people like me. It is hurting people like my parents. It is hurting people like Attorney General Merrick Garland, whose grandparents were Holocaust survivors. Please, for the love of God, we can debate about what our children are learning. Absolutely, that is important. But I never thought I, as an immigrant, would live in a country where kindness is a wedge issue. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Isabel Gershon.
Hi, my name is Isabel, and I am a student at LE. I am a freshman, and I'm here to speak for culturally responsive teaching. Again, as we've stated, critical race theory is not being taught in K through 12 schools because it is a law subject, so I don't see why I would bring that up. I am coming to you as an LGBTQ+ and Jewish student as a district, and I'm going to tell you there is homophobia and anti-Semitism in these schools. I'm not blaming any individual members, but I'll speak about a specific example. I had a friend in history class, and when they were reading about the Holocaust, every time she said Jew, a student yelled dirty over it. This is what students are facing, and I feel like it is ridiculous to say that adding kindness and adding a perspective of empathy to education is going to harm us. We are in need of help, we are in need of support, and we need to start teaching our kids, our students, to have more empathy and to look at every story with the victim in mind. I would especially like to address a certain thing I've seen in the community where people are comparing mask mandates to the Holocaust, and I feel like this is another example of how culturally responsive teaching could really help our district, because currently there are adults who are sadly not educated enough on the Holocaust because they weren't taught with the lens of empathy, that they believe that the murder of 10 million people based off of their race, their ethnicity, their religion, and their sexuality is the same as having to wear a piece of cloth over your face. I understand if it's not comfortable. I don't love wearing one, but I think it's ridiculous that we are fighting over mask mandates and saying things like this when our students are suffering from all this discrimination, when we're fighting about if pronouns are acceptable to bring up, when it's just a figure of speech. And I know I'm kind of ranting, and I apologize for that, but I would just like to address that students are hurting right now, and focusing on just some, national talking points from parents who are not even in the schools is hurting all of us.
Jennifer Stamp.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Stamp, and I have a child in District 308. When the U.S. Supreme Court desegregated schools in Brown versus Board of Education, they recognized the importance of public education for all races on equal terms. They noted explicitly in the decision that public education is not only important to a democratic society, but it is, quote, the foundation of good citizenship. There is a lot of talk about patriotism these days, but we rarely hear about good citizenship. Good citizenship isn't decided by skin tone, sexual orientation, or parental choice. In the legal sense, It's decided by the U.S. Constitution. And in daily life, good citizenship rests in how we treat each other. It calls for us to form a more perfect union. Public schools are for students from all walks of life. They teach our nation's values, not the values of individual parents. It's never been a parent's choice to dictate the values of our nation. I challenge anyone who opposes CRT to accurately define, discuss it, and explain how it's being taught to a kindergartner. I could have saved myself $100,000 in law school debt if that were possible. But it's simply being used as a euphemism for civil rights and the Civil War, and to not teach those things. If public schools remove certain parts of history, they will necessarily have to omit portions of the Constitution, as well as ignore the sacrifices of our citizens and soldiers throughout history. There would be no meaningful way to discuss the Civil War or civil rights without discussing our Constitution. I am told that white children may feel uncomfortable in these discussions. I imagine children of color feel very uncomfortable in these discussions. And if parents want to be involved, this is where parental involvement can ease the discomfort of their child and help them with that emotional upset. Instead, we see parental involvement in the form of political theater and intimidation tactics. If people want to call themselves mama bears or patriots, sit your child down and teach them about our nation's history. Teach them about the Constitution. That would be the patriotic thing to do. Sit your child down and talk to them when they're having an emotional problem. That would be the mama bear thing to do. You can do it in a way that gives your child comfort rather than engaging in fear tactics and terrorizing a community. I hope that they would do it in a way that helps perfect our union. And if you do that, I'll root for you. I'll work with you.
I apologize, but your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was all.
That was all. 6.1, we are ready for board member comments. Okay. I have several this evening. First, I want to thank Dr. Sparlin and the administration's recognition of the school board and the work that we do, and really recognize my fellow board members. I just want to say that this is one of the hardest jobs. It's one of the hardest jobs I have ever done in my life, and I've gone through grad school and have a doctorate in a lot of things, and I've worked with kids in trauma, and this is one of the hardest jobs I've ever had to do, and extremely heart-wrenching. And people don't recognize that, and I'm just letting you know, and letting all my board members up here know that we're together, and I appreciate all of you, even when we don't agree, right? Because that happens. But this is a very hard position to have a love and passion for our students and for wanting everyone to get a good education, and to honestly always be a target of criticism no matter what choice you make. That being said, regarding the vacancy that will occur, I know, nice segue, right?
Good
I know.
advertisement. Good job.
But people also need to know the reality of what they're getting into. And there's lots of rewarding things as well, but it is challenging. But I am going to say that the process for filling the vacancy will likely not occur until January. We will have 60 days to fill the vacancy once Mrs. Kroner is no longer a resident of our district. At that time, we will make applications available online, and you should receive emails to know when that process has started. The board will be interviewing a select number of applicants, and then we'll choose from those interviewed applicants. One thing to be aware of is that we need to select someone who is in the Oswego Congressional Township, since that is where Mrs. Kroner is from, and in order to represent those constituents. If you do have any questions, or if you would like to get on a list to be notified when the applications are ready, you can email Ursula for that, or if you have questions, you're certainly welcome to email myself. The last thing I just wanted to say, because this is our last meeting before Thanksgiving and Hanukkah, I did just want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and a happy Hanukkah.
I just wanted to say that I try every meeting to send out a note of gratitude to who different constituents in the district, and I have done so with our teachers and our bus drivers and our TAs. This week, I would really just like to talk about our home and school associations across the district. They provide a very important service to each of our schools, regardless of what they're called, home and school, home and what have you. I'm very grateful to them for all that they continue to do. They fill in gaps where the district is short, whether it comes to technology or services for our students, parties, you name it. And I'm very grateful to all of those home and school organizations across our district and what they do for our communities. So thank you to them.
Would anyone like to speak? Good. Okay, thank you. Okay, so board committee reports. We have the Finance Committee.
Yes. This is an interesting one simply because the topics that we're going to discuss are two of the presentations that are happening. So I will defer to those topics and I'll add my comments in during those sessions for that committee. And the same really for Colton and Anya. They're going to give a report later, so I will let it come from them and then I'll chime in at that time.
And I'll just add for finance and facilities that we did have a lot of conversation regardless of, we're not going to go over the presentations, but we had a lot of conversations surrounding wanting to make sure that we communicated well. What it is the narrative behind the numbers, because the numbers can get a little bit intense and the spreadsheet's long, but at the end of the day there's a story, and that story is how we educate. And so wanting to make sure that's communicated, I think, was the main thing that came out of this, that we just want to understand where our money goes.
Thank you. And the Teaching and Learning Committee?
You want to go or you want me to go?
Go ahead.
Okay. Similar to Finance and Facilities, we had a presentation that we will be seeing here tonight by Faith, and had some great discussion regarding that, and a lot of good questions were asked, and you will see, you know, we've got some work to do, but it was great to be able to discuss that in the committee prior to this meeting, and for them to be able to see it and add some input and help guide Faith and make some suggestions. So I will also, you know, hold back on my comments in particular regarding the presentation until we actually have that as a public body tonight. So.
Thank you. And Dr. Sparlin, the superintendent's report.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Marino, and good evening, board. I'd like to start off with some congratulations this evening. Congratulations to the OHS boys cross-country team on finishing 5th in the state. Also, congratulations to Audra Soderland on finishing 15th in the state cross-country as well. Congratulations to the girls swim and dive on winning the sectionals and finishing 4th in the state tournament this weekend. The team was only 2 points away from tying for 2nd place. The 200 freestyle relay of Chloe Diner, Katie Griesick, Lauren Wiley, and Corrine Geist took 1st and were state champions for this race, so congratulations to them and all the girls swim and dive. Very nice showing this year. I'd also like to congratulate all of the student athletes who signed national letters of intent for college for next year. We had around 25 students between our 2 high schools who last Wednesday signed their national letters of intent. And last week was also National Psychology Week, which is celebrated every year, November 8th through the 12th. And this year's theme was Let's Get in Gear. And GEAR was the acronym provided to make a challenge to G, grow both personally and professionally. It encourages to E, engage in best practices, and A, advocate for children's access to mental health and learning supports. The R implies resilience and renewal despite the challenges of the past. So I think all of our 308 psychologists are very good examples of that, and I'd like to thank them for their service to District 308. I'd also like to spend a moment just talking about our recruitment and hiring efforts. The board knows that we have a number of positions available in our school district in a variety of areas. We've engaged in a very large media campaign to recruit people to the district, and I'd like to thank Teresa Comitas for all of her work in getting the word out. Over the past 10 days, we have held 3 open interview sessions in the evenings. We've conducted approximately 60 interviews and have hired for many positions. With that said, we still have ways to go. And tomorrow night from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock at the district office, we will be conducting more open interviews as we continue this process of filling our open positions, and we will continue to do so moving forward into the new year. By doing this, it will help alleviate staff stress and obviously help in student learning. So I'd also like to just thank all of the community, all of our staff members for spreading this word of mouth of our job openings and our open interview processes from 5 to 7 at the district office, because everyone working together has made a difference. And finally, in our strategic plan and Vision 308, each month we're providing the board with a presentation from the different district departments highlighting the work that is being done. In October it was special education. This month is student learning. Next month is budget, and in January we'll be talking about social emotional learning. So with that said, I'd like to make just a couple comments, my closing comments on SEL. The social emotional learning of our students in our district has always been important, and probably never more so important than this year. Entering the 21-22 school year, we recognize the need for additional support in the area of social emotional learning and student mental health. Planning began last spring regarding the increased support in each area for our schools. As the school year has unfolded, we've continued to plan ongoing expansion of support based on identified student, staff, and needs. We implemented updated SEL curriculum aligned to the Illinois State Learning Standards. Elementary has incorporated a time period for SEL instruction on a daily basis into their master schedules. Junior high incorporates SEL instruction twice a week during their student support time, and high school is doing the same approximately twice a month during their student support time. We've increased teacher professional development opportunities in SEL and mental health supports. We've increased access to therapeutic mental health support in the community, and we are currently working on implementing counseling services that will come into the schools to work with student groups as needed, along with evening events for parents and families to attend, and we look forward to those evening events starting in January. Our next item on the agenda this evening is the Student Ambassador Report. And I'm happy to share that the student ambassadors, along with Dr. Waller, are going to share the work that we've done thus far, along with the results of the student survey that was given on October 20th. As the board will see, the first item the students have decided to research, which they will also ultimately provide recommendations on, will also help the area of student mental wellness. With that said, I'm going to give the floor to Colton to start us off on item 6.4. Colton?
A lot of data tonight. So the student survey included 9th through 12th grade at the high school level. Out of all our students, we had just under 2,600 respondents to the survey. The largest subgroup was white European, but over half of our students identified as multiple backgrounds. The groups created from the survey include Asian, Asian white, Black white, African American and Black, Chicano, Hispanic, Latinx, Indigenous, Middle Eastern, multiracial, Indian, Afro-Latinx, and Filipino. 82 students did not identify a race or ethnicity. In addition, only 30 students did not identify their gender. The survey included students who identified in various ways, with 1,184 boys and 1,222 girls, 101 other, 14 transgender boys, 7 transgender girls, 40 non-binary students, 10 gender fluid students, 5 agender students, 2 demi-girl students, 2 questioning genderqueer students. When responding to the question, are you a part of the LGBTQIA+ community, 473 students identified yes, and 189 students chose I prefer not to answer. So some of the top responses we got from the survey, and really the beginning of our deep dive into the results. The survey itself is broken down into 4 categories. It included an academic focus, a school structure focus, social climate focus, and student-to-student interactions focus. In the initial deep dive, we looked at the most important and second most important responses to each of these categories. From academic focus, we found that most students were concerned with the amount of homework. From school structure, we found that most students were concerned with clarity on how administration handles discipline as it relates to race, gender identity, and sexual harassment. From social climate, we found that most students were concerned with teachers' role in supporting students' mental capacity, feeling overwhelmed with school and personal responsibilities. Finally, from student-to-student interaction, we found that most students were concerned with sexual harassment. These were the top areas. However, we pulled the top 2 to 4 from each category to provide an opportunity to dig deeper. The data was then further disaggregated by race, ethnicity, gender, identity, school, and grade, depending on the topic.
Thank you, Colton. So from those 4 categories, academic focus, school structure, school climate, and student-to-student interaction, there were approximately 14 areas that were the largest. And so from there, we began to dig and pull from what was the most important and breaking that down as Colton has just shared. So our number one concern for students was amount of homework, and there were 6 subgroups who indicated as number 1. Those students were Asian, Asian white, Filipino, no race, white European, and male students. But 7 more subgroups indicated it as second or third most important. Those were Black, white students, Chicano, Indigenous, Latinx, Middle Eastern, multiracial, and female students. The second top most important had 4 groups. And as I'm breaking this down, I'm breaking it down by subgroups so that the way that we went across with this data is looking at each subgroup and seeing which and the amount of subgroups that indicated that it was number 1. As Anya will share, as we further broke it down, it is how we came to decide what we would end up researching. So 4 subgroups indicated that sexual harassment was the most important issue. That was Black and white, Chicano, Hispanic, and females. 42% of females reported this being the most important issue. 8 more subgroups indicated it as a second or third most important issue. Indigenous, Latinx, Middle Eastern, multiracial, no race, white, LGBTQIA+, and male students. Latinx and Middle Eastern students identified clarity from admin on how discipline is handled based on race, identity, and sexual harassment as most important to them. Other subgroups who indicated priority concern are Asian, African American and Black, Chicano, Hispanic, multiracial, white, LGBTQIA, and female students. This was a tie for third. The third most important, that was indicated most important by multiracial and LGBTQIA students, identified LGBTQIA and Black, Indigenous, people of color's representation in the curriculum as third most important. Other subgroups who indicated priority concern were Black and White, African American and Black, Chicano, Filipino, Indigenous, Latinx, Afro-Latinx, and Middle Eastern students. The next most important that was identified as most important is the Indigenous students identified the representation of LGBTQIA and Black Indigenous people of color in the school culture as most important to them. Other subgroups with priority concern were Black, White, African American and Black, Chicano, Filipino, Afro-Latinx, and LGBTQIA students. The final most important group that indicated racial and identity discrimination as most important were our African American and Black students. This is from the student-student interactions as most important. Other subgroups with priority concern were Asians, Filipino, Latinx, Afro-Latinx, and multiracial students.
At the last two student advisory committee meetings, we collaborated on the results of the administered survey and the concerns of our peers reflected within it. We analyzed the needs of both the majority and subgroups of our collective student bodies. Marginalized groups displayed major concerns upon the topics of race, identity, culture, and curriculum. The common majority expressed distress about their mental and physical safety within the school environment. One of the top issues the collective majority of our students indicated as important to them was teacher roles with students' mental health and capacity. In total, 2,593 students took the survey. Of this, 708 students said it was the most important issue, and 608 students claimed it was the second most important issue to them, which totals to 1,316 students. From these results, the Student Advisory Committee found it necessary to address this clear concern, but we also understood the extensiveness of the topic of mental health. There are various facets of mental health and various roots of the issue as they relate to the educational environment that must be addressed. And by utilizing further results of the survey, our Student Advisory Committee is hoping to target these specific root causes. We also recognize the leaders in our district that have prioritized mental health in our schools and have worked to address it. Our committee members and student ambassadors want part of our future focus to be centered around providing student voice to these existing projects to best address mental health as a concern among our student bodies. The second issue that the Student Advisory Committee noticed in the survey results was sexual harassment. Of those who took the survey, 527 said it was the most important, and 798 placed it as the second most important, which totals to 1,325 students in our district. The fact that so many students felt concerned about their physical safety was an issue our committee wanted to address directly. This topic, as well as mental health, are two focal points to our committee's research in the future as we work to illuminate student voice and student concerns. As we begin our journey with YPAR, or Youth-Led Participatory Action Research, we hope to create specific problem statements, research questions, and collect data on these specific issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya, Colton, and Dr. Waller. They just gave you a lot of information, a lot of statistics from the student survey that was collected. What questions do you have for the group?
I just want to say bravo. Oh my gosh, this is a lot of work. But at the end of the day, the opportunity for you all to come to us with not just anecdotal information, but data that will help inform us as to how we improve the culture and the climate of this of our district. And so I'm looking forward to your research, and then the call to action that you'll bring to us as a result of this data, and putting this information in the hands of the students, and then being the social scientists that you all will become as you go forward in terms of making sure that we as the community understand what the problem is, and then bringing a solution, because that is the beauty of all of this. Like, you're not just coming to say what the problem is, but you're going to bring a solution, and then to call us to action, because it's not the responsibility of the students to bring a solution. It's the responsibility of you to bring us the information, and it's our responsibility because you're calling us to action. So I just want to make sure that we all understand that it's our role as board members to be the ones to bring the action, because that's what they're calling us to do. So bravo, excellent work, all of you, thank you.
I just wondered if, Dr. Waller, welcome, nice to finally have you at the table. What was the most, I guess, surprising data that you received, or was it more verifying what you've heard and what you've seen and so forth?
So, well, I would say two things. Sexual harassment and the amount of students who shared that it's most important and second most important was a bit daunting, but it also kind of led us into some very organic, awesome conversations about, well, where is this taking place? Is it on social media? Is it in the school? And it kind of mirrors itself, though, to that clarity from admin on how things are handled. So we've been able to really engage and dig. And I think the second most surprising was that 18% of the students who took the survey identified that they were indeed in part of the LGBTQIA+ community, which would technically make that group our second largest subgroup, which means that there's a call to action and urgency that's necessary for them. And so I'm just honored to be able to share the space with these two brilliant leaders in order to support them in bringing about change.
And I'd say for me, the most alarming would definitely be the sexual harassment in the student-to-student interaction part of the survey. That was definitely alarming to me. Whereas the response that was more verifying to me was the struggle in our students' mental health aspect of their student life here at District 308, and just recent events and just the world we live in now. That was definitely more verifying to me that this is a problem present in, all across the country, but specifically our district.
I completely agree with Colton on the sexual harassment front. That was such a shocking statistic to see. I think that was just kind of that universal feeling within the student advisory committee, and we saw the statistic and we realized how large of an issue this was going to be, and we realized the steps that we would have to take to address that. I think on my part, one other statistic that surprised me was definitely the call from the LGBTQIA+ community and people of color within our student bodies that wanted representation in curriculum and the school culture. I think that just creating that sense of unity within our student body and within that school culture, that school environment and our climate here in OEHS and OHS, it's just so important. I think especially, like Colton said, in the world we live now, things are changing, and kind of adapting to address those changes is so important.
I also want to just commend you for doing really we've heard the phrase, we can do hard things. This is one of those hard things. Taking this information, giving our students a voice, and being the vehicle through which that voice is amplified. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the work.
Well, I have plenty to say, but I just didn't want to jump in because I don't know if I would stop talking. So I'm just trying to give everybody else a chance to speak up.
I want to say that I'm very grateful that the two of you are sitting here with us and that we get to hear your voices, and very grateful for all of the students that we have in the Student Advisory Committee. I can echo a lot of what LaTanya and Jennifer have had to say, and not going to lie that the results feel very heavy, right? I'm sitting with that heaviness right now, and just staying focused on finding solutions and what can we do to help our students, and just very grateful to have, as they like to say, boots on the ground, right? And for you to be bringing this information to us, and for us to make some headway on the climate and watch this improve. So thank you.
So I'll jump in just quickly. I can't express just how proud I am. And I really wish, I know that all of you are expressing your gratitude now, but to have the privilege to be in the room as they are deliberating and processing the data, it makes me just so proud. The intellect, the conversation, the ability to work together, even the deductive reasoning to even get to the point of uncovering half of the things that have been uncovered within the survey, to me is just, you know, it was pure brilliance, and it gave me not only a sense of pride, but even hope, because we have such young people and such young leaders that will go out and help us in our society. Other thing that I was very proud about is that almost half of the student population took this survey. That sample size is incredible, and it cannot, I don't think it can be ignored. But it also speaks volumes to the results that we have. And so I'm very excited, but also very surprised by the results. And as LaTanya was stating, and many of you were saying, it becomes now our responsibility to do something. And given the results, not even to do something later, like to do something like right now. So we have to discuss almost effective immediately, like what can we do in order to, of course, not to steal the thunder from the students, and to allow them to go back and do their research, and to find out and to dig in. But still, I think that, you know, that is something that we should, to have a conversation to discuss. But again, just very excited about the work that they're doing, very excited about all of the other committee members of the other student ambassadors that are representing, and then Colton and Anya for their leadership.
And I think it's really important. I just want to hop in here. I think we've heard it from our parents. We've now heard it from our students. The time is now. Like, this can't be lip service anymore. So to the board and to Dr. Sparlin, Dr. Dahlquist, we know that the need is there. We need to understand as a board what we need, what you need, and what we need to give you, and how we need to do it. The results were heavy, but we now have to act, and we want you to continue to lead the way. We want you to tell us what you need from us, and we will continue to follow your lead. So thank you.
I'd just like to commend the group. This group hasn't been meeting once a month. They've been meeting almost weekly. And to be able to get to this point, to create the survey, to administer the survey, to dissect it, and be able to disaggregate the information that was provided this evening. And I know they're very eager to. I know they're meeting this week to discuss the white power process and to start beginning the research. So, thank you for everyone's efforts.
I love the fact that this is, student-led, and it truly is, right, Dr. Sparrow?
Yes, it is.
It's not this adult-centered notion of what we think is
absolutely
is what should be done, but it's their work, it's them leading, it's them saying this is what we need, because adults have a different perspective, but your perspective is the one that allows you and us to make sure that the decisions that adults are making are not just what you're consuming, but that it is what you have told us is where you want to go and what you need in order to get there. So.
And just to make one last point based on that, based on your question, was you asked what was surprising. That was something that we discussed in the meeting, and that's what led to a lot of the dialogue and conclusions that they came to was based on the data. They don't allow themselves to go off and to think, to insert their opinions. They are so focused on the data, and I just appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so, sorry, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I make a motion to approve all items under consent, including 7.1, minutes from the October 25th, 2021 Board of Education meeting, open and closed session, the November 1st, 2021 Board of Education public forum, item 7.2, to acknowledge the FOIA request received by the district, And 7.3, to approve the following board policy references and legal updates. Section 1, Student District Organization, 1:10. Section 2, School Board, 2:20. Section 3, General School Administration, 3:30. Section 5, General Personnel, 5:30. Section 6, Instruction, 6:170, 6:255, and Section 7, Students, 7:230.
Second.
Mrs. Simulton?
Can I ask a question
Mm-hmm.
about one of these items on the policies? Can I? So on page 2, one of the says the superintendent shall ensure that the district does not engage in any investigation or inquiry prohibited by law and complies with each of the following. So number 8 says the district provides equal
Which
employment.
policy are you?
Yeah.
Which number is it?
Number, does it have a number?
It should have a
Yes.
number, colon, number.
In the
Should
right-hand
be one of
corner.
these.
5.30?
Oh,
Yeah, general personnel, 5.30.
Yeah. Yeah.
that's under hiring process and criteria.
Okay.
I'm reading right here. Number 8, the district provides equal employment opportunities to all persons. See policy 5:10, equal employment opportunity in minority recruitment. And I'm just wanting to make sure that, I asked the question like, what other committees are reviewing, this policy for input? Like, I know that when I was there was the Recruitment and Retention Committee, and obviously we have the Equity Board Advisory Committee, and I'm just wondering who else is giving input? What other committees are giving input to these kinds of matters?
I think Maureen or Donna can correct me if I'm wrong. Typically, it's just the policy committee that reviews the policies based on suggested changes.
For this one, which is in section 5 for personnel, that's correct. It would be the policy committee and then the board. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, Ms. Hamilton, you'll see the prior times that the board has considered changes to that policy. And if there are issues or concerns, the board asks for the policy committee to consider them.
Right, and I think that we could, as a board, ask another committee to review a policy if we wanted to. We felt that it was important.
Yes, we have done that before.
Yeah.
Because I would like to see what our Equity Board Advisory Committee, the Retention and Recruitment Committee, what do they think of this? And, what do they think of 5:10 in terms of minority recruitment? Because when you go and look at that, there's a lot there to unpack in terms of how do we think about our minority recruitment? And I know that those were things that we were delving into, last year, and I'd like to know what they think of that. What does our Equity Board Advisory Committee think of those things? So I think I'd like to see some input from those two committees.
From the Equity Committee and which
and
other
the
committee?
Recruitment and Retention Committee. If they still
We don't have a board recruitment and retention committee.
That's the internal committee.
internal.
And
That's all.
Are you asking for that, Latanya, just so I'm clear, on 5:30 or 5:10? 5:10? Because that has
5:10.
Okay, so you're okay with this one, but you'd like to dive deeper into 5:10 with those other committees?
Yes.
Okay, hold on.
Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, so you're talking about the ones that are coming up for information, not the ones here to be approved.
Correct. Because
Okay.
these are
Okay.
there's no changes to this, right?
Other
Just
than
legal
the-
references.
In the
Right.
legal reference, right.
But I would like, but I would.
Okay, so we'll cover that when we
Okay.
get to the information section.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Mrs. Simulton?
Aye.
Dr. Marino?
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood?
Aye.
Mrs. Croner?
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle?
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Item 8.1 is regarding academic student achievement test data. Associate Superintendent for Educational Services, Faith Dahlquist, is going to take us through the information for tonight's presentation. Faith?
Thank you. If you'd like to take notes by slide number, that might help. There'll be a lot of time for questions at the end of this. So it's always exciting to get into and talk about student academic data and look at some of our opportunities for improvement, as well as some of the things that are causing a little bit of our success. I want to remind everybody that this is testing that is done through multiple choice answers. So this doesn't measure creativity, problem solving, SEL, all those types of things that are also important but are not easily measured on this type of test. Interesting data presentation, one very different than what I would usually give, because we're going to be looking at some very old data on which we made some hypotheses, and then look at new data. So the data that I'll be looking through this evening is from our state tests, IAR, as well as SAT, and the last time we had all of our students in the building to take those tests, that was 2019. So that was right as I started, and that was data that I came in with and started looking, and because of what we saw in that data, we started some of our work with the literacy as well as the math frameworks. And now you'll be able to see whether our new data that we just got in the fall also showed those same things that we were concerned about in 2019 or not. The state data I'll be looking at this evening, we're going to disaggregate it by female and male, as well as by the state codes of Black, White, and Hispanic. There are many other data groups that we could disaggregate this, and if anyone is interested, you can go to the Illinois Interactive Report Card site and see many more different subgroups of data. Just a reminder about some of our demographics, and this is just looking at our percent. 27% of our students are from low-income families, 53% of our students are white, around 10% are Black, and 24% Hispanic, and then the numbers underneath that are the actual number of students in each of those categories. So the first thing that I want to point out is this state data. And if you're not used to looking at this, this is something that anybody across the world who has internet access can go look at from the Illinois report card. And what this shows, again, is from 2019, and I'm going to first go through all of our reading data, then I'm going to switch over to math. The green chart there shows the opportunity or achievement gap between female and male, and then the blue represents that from the state. So if you look at that, the very top line of female means that we have 51% of our females that were passing the test in 2019 compared to 36% of our males. Then the state was at 44% and males were at 32, and showing actually 31 with that gap. Now this is the aggregate. This is the aggregate of grades 3 all the way through 8. Our gap increases as the years progress. At grade 7, there is a 22 percentage point split between females and males. If you look at this next piece, this is the opportunity gap between Black and white students and also Hispanic and white students, and it compares the gap between the district, which again is in green, or the state, which is at blue. And our opportunity gap is smaller in looking at those, but you can see that there is still quite a big opportunity for improvement. It's also important to know how income affects student achievement. And this is looking at, again, the district comparison and achievement gap, with that top line being non-low income students, percentage passing, and the bottom line being low income. Our opportunity gap there is 24 percentage points, while the state is at 30. And the reason that I bring that up is it does really impact the different race categories in different ways. 12% of our white students are from low-income families, 43% of our Black students are from low income, and 39% of our Hispanic. It's also important to note when you look back at the Hispanic and white piece that a higher percentage of our Hispanic students are also English learners, which impact their achievement on these tests as well. Now, let's fast forward. This is the test that our students took in the second week of September. So some of them have come off of being at home and not coming into school. And we started to look at, and this is a brand new test for 308, so there is no trend data on this piece. But what this says is the very first column, 56% of our second graders were on target and at low risk, grade 3 at 67, grade 4, and grade 5. In other districts, when I've used this particular test, that second grade number is pretty low. I'm optimistic that by January, after those students have been in school for a while, we can raise that up, but that is going to be something that we really need to continue to look at. Then the next two columns are again just the girl-boy comparison. And what I've done on the slides is if there was less than a 6 percentage point difference, I'm not as concerned about that, so I did not color code that at all. If there's a 6 to 10 percentage point difference, it's color coded in yellow. And then if there's a 10 percentage point difference, that's highlighted in orange. And you can see definitely with the different races, we have quite an opportunity for improvement. That was elementary. Now let's go to junior high. Junior high, you're looking at those percentages of 67, 63, and 53. It is important to note that usually across tests and across the nation, there is, as students get a little bit older and into 8th grade, a decline, but this is more than your average piece. We're also wondering how those students who may not have been at school for most of their junior high years have now hit 8th grade and are close to that high school proficiency level and have some catching up to do. Just like the slides before this, there's the difference between girl and boy performance, and then difference between white, black, and Hispanic. This is looking back at the high school level now. This is the SAT and the reading state comparison. Again, our opportunity gap is 8 percentage points between females and male in reading, and the state has a 6 percentage point split. This is the difference between our white and our black students and our white and Hispanic student scores, and the opportunity gap within there. This is more current. This is our SAT from spring 2021. This happened during remote and during hybrid instruction, but we did have a high percentage of our students coming in, so it is relative to look at this. It is important to note that the cutoff that I'm using for these scores is the state cutoff, which is higher than the College Board cutoff for proficiency. So I want to be really careful that I'm not saying that all girls learn this way, or all boys learn this way, or even that there's just a binary system there. But when you look at the learning preferences generalized for girls, you'll see in general auditory over visual is that way, and then boys, more tactile visual preference, competition, correct or incorrect answers. And if you think about how you were instructed in reading, you may see one side of the column be more apparent than others. There is absolutely brain research out there that girls are not better readers by brain than boys. It is the type of instruction that is given. It is human nature to teach the way you learn. Most of our elementary teachers are female. So without getting in and diving into knowing these differences, there are some preferences and some learning style things that are overlooked in curriculum and in materials. If you do not see yourself in the materials that you are learning or reading from, it is not as impactful. Students also need to see themselves in school staff to make that connection. We also need to make sure that we are holding very high expectations. We also need to make sure that we are responding to student voice, responding to what our students have told us, whether it's race, whether it's low income. It's just knowing and reacting to what your students need. Also by income, research would say explicit vocabulary instruction is the way that you are going to really help our students that come from low-income families. Same types of things, students not feeling included in a classroom setting or not being held to high expectations. We also need to worry about not having enough resources or technology or books at home or to access. And then one of the leading things that we can do to decrease this opportunity or achievement gap between low income and non-low income is more SEL and instruction and support for our low income students. But I would say that it's really what is good instruction for all. So we started out back in 2019 when we saw those gaps to work on a literacy framework. And at that time, we thought it was important. We worked on it with a committee and brought it forth that one of the key things is we needed to have choice during independent reading time so that students can choose from many genres and characters from backgrounds and experiences, and also at just right text so that all students are challenged, but all students also have success. We've added an interventionist to each elementary school to help assist with this, and we also added coaches and professional development to support teachers in this literacy framework. And if you remember, part of the literacy framework is also a statement about diversity, equity, inclusion to make sure, because if that climate for learning piece, which is the second half of this slide, is not in place, all the best reading instruction in the world does not make it happen. We have to have positive learning environments. We have to have social emotional skills taught. We need to share learning targets, have responsive teaching, and we have to have more ways for students to have choice and voice in their learning. Math. So now I'm going to go through almost the exact same set of data, but I'm going to talk about math. And there's not as much of a discrepancy, it's like between black and white and Hispanic and white student performance. I have an opportunity to really raise those scores in all areas. This is what it looks like for our FastBridge data. Again, this is just what happened in August and September. And the differences between girl and boy performances, white, black, and Hispanic. It is really important to note that some of our schools do not have this gap between girl and boy performance at all. Some of our schools have as high as a 36 percentage point split. This is junior high. Big disparities between races as well as gender, but some of our schools do not have these gaps. One of our junior highs has a 21 percentage point split between our girl and boy performance. This is what the SAT looks like back in 2019. This is the opportunity gap between the races, again, back from 2019. This is the difference between low income and non-low income. It plays a factor across many of our different groups. This is the SAT that was most current from the spring in 2021. Again, the state cutoff is higher than the College Board cutoff. I'm going to put up this same chart. I'm going to say there is absolutely no brain research that says the boys are better achievers in math. It is the type of instruction that we are given. There are ways to fix this, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. There are also ways to address the differences in race achievement. Some of those are students feeling included in the classroom. How do we have more diverse staff? How do we make sure that we're holding students to high expectations? How do we make sure that the math problems and the textbooks are relative and meaningful to all of our students? So some of the plans that we started back in my first year here, and then pandemic hit, is we created a new math framework, and it includes time for collaborative structures where students need to discuss math. It includes explicitly teaching precise math vocabulary to diminish that achievement gap between our low-income and our non-low-income students. It includes making our math problems relevant and engaging to real-world problems. While we've just started that work at the junior high level, we will begin that work in elementary after this, because elementary is a lot of where those initial foundations happen, and then the gaps grow from there. I'll highlight again how important the Climate for Learning framework is, because the best math vocabulary in the world, it is my belief, put on a learning environment that does not support all students or doesn't help them out with their social emotional learning will not have as much impact. Some additional district-wide plans is we need to really model the process of using data. So we've started a district improvement team this year with building administrators that come together with district administrators to review district-wide data. We've also shared the disaggregated data that we've just gotten from our testing in Fastbridge, as well at the high school level, with school teams for them to review and help them create plans to address discrepancies. But again, some of our schools do not have this big of a gap. We've also created a system of classroom walkthroughs. We want building and district administrators to visit all the classrooms to monitor and support math literacy and the Culture for Learning frameworks. And then we need to use the knowledge that we see from when we're there, as well as getting information back through surveys about professional development, to design trainings and communication moving forward. We also want to hire educators from diverse backgrounds. We also need to be partnering with parents to make sure that they know about resources and information, and that we've heard their concerns about what needs to be addressed. So I thought long and hard on this next slide, and I've given this to 2 board committees as well. And some feedback is, Faith, we're really tired. There's a lot going on. Some feedback is, Faith, you better double down and stop sleeping, because we got work to do. Both opinions could be correct with where we're at. So what we're suggesting is, let's not stop the work that we started before the pandemic. We had created a literacy framework and a math framework, and in April we created and finalized the Climate for Learning framework, and that was before all of last year. We really need to continue that work, and we'll have to temper it with our staff is tired, and hear that, and maybe take some smaller steps. But I do not feel that we can give up and say we can't move on, and we have to do that. We need to continue our efforts to recruit and retain diverse staff. As soon as that Fastbridge data comes in December and January, I will be disaggregating it and looking at what are our new opportunities, and what are some of the things that maybe we can say we had success with here in the first few months. And then we already have all of our walkthroughs scheduled for January and February to walk through the schools again. And then it's going to be really important that as we support our student SEL, we also support staff SEL, and listen to them and try to find the right balance of when we push forward and when we also celebrate some of the things along the way. As I know very, very well, our staff and our admins are working exceedingly hard. I would say that we don't need to work harder, we just need to work smarter. Questions?
There's so many. Question I have, Faith, is you said several times throughout that there are schools that have no or minimal discrepancy, and then others that have these really large ones.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that to us?
Sure, and I could use an anecdote even. When you go through and you walk classrooms, and math instruction is very, here are your 16 problems, you can get them right, yes or no, move on. Those are the schools that our girls aren't performing as well in. We can tie that data in, that structure of the collaboration and the structure of those pieces. Sometimes it's not as easy to really get in and figure out the why, and we have to ask those questions, and those are some of the things that we're doing during our school improvement plan times or district improvement plan, and it's especially I'm usually better at it, but right now with data being 2.5 years old and the data that we just had from August with some of the students not really coming in the door, it's harder to draw those conclusions. It's better to ask questions and get in and talk about the type of instruction, and then I can solidify those things more in January.
But are you noticing that it's the schools with more low-income students or more minority students that are having
If you look at the
greater
aggregate,
discrepancies?
yes. If you look at certainly our scores that are from schools that do not have a higher percentage of low-income students usually do higher. But when you're looking at gender, they're coming from the same families, they're coming from the same pieces. That doesn't make the gender gap easily excused by anything other than instructional practices. And that's where I like to start having the conversations, because it isn't as complex. You know it. Then we can move to the complexities around low income, around race. But we first have to realize and know our impact as a system and as teachers on our instructional practices and our decisions.
Thank you, that was very helpful.
So, you spoke often about students not being able to see themselves in reading books at school, or students not feeling included in the classroom, students not seeing themselves in school staff, those kinds of things. So I know that you addressed recruitment and retention of staff. So regarding the items regarding the reading books at school and things like that, what are we doing regarding curriculum renewal, or how does all of that fit into and what support?
One of the things that we used some of our ESSER monies for, and to support the literacy framework, because a lot of our schools' libraries needed new books, or they needed just right books, and we made sure that we ordered these leveled libraries, that we had diversity both in author and characters and different cultures in mind. So we've started that influx, especially at the elementary level. Then we also pushed in some more copies of books and materials that are from more diverse backgrounds at the junior high, and a little bit at the high school. You'll see some more of that later on. But I'm getting to do curriculum review work, which I hadn't been able to do for a while. And we've written a curriculum review process that has diversity, equity, and inclusion as far as materials, as far as assessments, high on that priority piece. And we're using it as an equity lens as we are now redoing the elementary social studies curriculum, revising the junior high, and doing all of the high school social studies curriculum simultaneously. So yes, it is much more of a forefront based on this data and based on those pieces of what needed to be done. Is it fast enough? No. Is it in entirety enough yet? No. But we've started some really great crucial conversations, and we're past just talking about it. We're actually taking action.
And so just let me follow up real quick. And so regarding books in the classroom, are they going to be given options to read different books as opposed to just reading one type of book?
We've definitely put that in place at elementary and junior high. We're making some inroads toward having more choice and voice in selection of texts at high school. It's not uniform across the board yet.
Okay, thanks.
I just want to say thank you for those questions, LaTanya, because those are questions that I've asked Faith at the last 2 times she gave this presentation to me, and so she knows that while I appreciate the efforts to encourage diversity in independent reading topics, I think it's much more important that we allow for a little bit more choice, at least in those areas where the students are actually being assessed and assigned grades, because we're talking about real data here and test scores and numbers, things that they're expected to answer questions and get things right. And when our only choice options are with independent reading, And again, I'll share an example that Faith has heard from one of my children whose choice independent reading was Calvin and Hobbes, because that's what he liked, and that was great that he got to read that, but he's not getting graded on that, and asking deep questions. And I feel like when we're requiring all the students to read the same novel, we're not doing them a service. I understand, like, we can cover a topic of study and have different, choices in title within that subject, and I feel like I hope that that's what we're moving towards, because I think that that will go a long way. If it's something that they're being assessed on, it's going to help us be able to know, are they comprehending what they're reading? Where can we meet those gaps? In also helping them actually read something that they care about and want to sit down and read, instead of they're forced to read chapters 1 through 4 tonight, and it's like, bleh. So.
Is having more choice in that, and that is a piece of Envision 308 that is more of a focus for next school year.
Sure, I know you can't do everything at once, and I fully appreciate, and I want to say this to all of our teachers and support staff and building admin. I know that, what we're hearing is not one more thing. For the love of all that is holy, please. We get that, and we don't want to continue like pouring on, and then we see numbers like this, and we can't just stop. Like you said, we can't just do nothing out of an effort to not add one more thing, but we also really need to be taking a look at, is there something we can, step back on in order to improve in this area? I think that's important that we find that balance, because we do recognize the social emotional needs of our teachers are critical for them to be able to address the social emotional needs of our students. So
I would love to piggyback off of that, because it's like the perfect segue. Can you go back one slide where, like, the next steps? No, you were right. Yeah, right there. Here's where I struggle with this slide. And it's very hard not to put my HR hat on. 2% of black male, of teachers in the country are black males, and about 20 to 25% are males. So for me, it's really hard, because bullet number 2 is going to be a lot less attainable than some of the other bullets on here. So for me, this slide is slightly misleading, and I apologize I didn't think about this sooner, but it kind of popped into my head tonight. And then when I also think about what we can do for our staff, which is we can take things off of their plate and focus, if I were to look at this, I would say the number one thing we can do on here is support our staff social emotional health and their well-being. With doing that, can we take something like the walkthroughs off? And I understand the purpose of walkthroughs. I think they're incredibly important. Is this the right time to be doing them? Is this the place where it belongs? Like, if COVID hadn't happened, I would totally agree, and I understand. But I guess when I'm looking at this chart, these things are not equal. And so two is going to be very tough. Number 1 is our kind of our overall overarching, I can't even think of the word right now, but our overarching idea is that we have our frameworks and sticking within our frameworks. Obviously, we're going to monitor FastBridge to be able to review what we did earlier, but the last 2 are where I'm struggling. Like, let's support our staff by taking things off their plate. Are there other things that we can take off their plate so that they can focus on math and reading?
Right. If I may, I just want to clarify on the walkthrough piece. From my vantage point, walkthroughs are the most stressful on time for my staff and a few building principals. It is not the intent to evaluate teachers. We don't even give feedback to a specific teacher. I know it's nerve-wracking. They're coming into my room for 5 minutes. But without us being there, and I got lots of positive responses that we were there. I did not receive one negative email or don't come back. type of thing. I have at a different district, so it's okay to, you know, look incredulous, but I was kind of expecting at least a couple of emails of like, you picked today. But we share ahead of time. We say, this is the date we're coming. The dates have been published since August. We do never go in and talk to the principal about this is what we saw in this particular teacher's class. We don't give a checklist. It is, for me, the assessment of how I'm doing.
Okay.
So when I go through and I look through, is the literacy instruction that we're asking for, am I starting to see glimmers of it? Are the learning targets there? It's my formative assessment on how I monitor whether we're being effective in changing instructions, so that when I give this data presentation again in a year, we see a difference. So if it's coming across as really stressful to teachers, I hope that they'll call me or email me, because that's not the intent. The intent is for me to get an assessment of how our professional development and our communication is impacting change.
That's
I have
good
a
to
question
know.
on this slide. I'm sorry. I have just question on this slide. It's really this slide or several slides. Just the solution and the cause that has been stated. Bullet point number 2, hire educators from diverse backgrounds. It's been stated on all the slides is that, you know, representation, of course, for the sub populations that we're discussing, it would help. So a stated solution and cause. So my question is really what proactive strategies, and Jen was just saying that that's really hard. So what proactive strategies are we actually deploying to do step number 2 versus waiting on those qualified candidates to actually apply? Like, what are we doing to go out and find them? And do we have a strategy for here are the ways that we're doing that? Because I think that at this point, if we're still waiting for it to happen, it's going to be difficult.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And that goes back to 5:10. Exactly. So I'm saying, okay, what are we doing?
Yes.
That's exactly what where we should be going.
Right. So I have a couple of questions.
Wait.
Also.
Is there a response?
She's going to respond, and then
Thank you.
Sorry. So most of the work has been done on trying to retain and keep the administrators from diverse background and the staff that we have from, and we brought together groups last year to talk about what were their concerns, or also what were the things that kept them at 308, and to make sure that we didn't get rid of that. That group also felt strongly enough that they worked on how do we go out to different colleges, what are the pieces that we need to do. I will also freely admit that we're working really hard through HR just to get staff right now, so that hasn't been the time that we've done that yet. Some of that main hiring things for next year and those pieces would be happening, but I also want to comment and compliment HR. As I've been sitting in on the interview nights, we've had a lot of staff from diverse backgrounds and different races applying. The people that I have been interviewing were much more diverse candidates than what I'm used to. So we have been seeing that the efforts through social media, through the publications that Dr. Sparlin was highlighting today, that has been working. And we're not sure why that caused those pieces to come in, but we'll definitely have to keep that as a word of mouth piece. Seems to be helping quite a bit.
Yeah, and from a diverse standpoint, just men as well.
Yes.
Because I think that, you know, that's something that we need in the district.
Right, and then what gets measured gets done. And so how are we measuring, or how are we setting goals around that? Because if we just continue to say we're going to recruit and retain them, but yet we don't have any goals or measurable indicators to how we're going to
And
get
in
there.
Envision 308, there are some measurable pieces that Mr. Miller had put together of percentages of new hires compared to those that are graduating from colleges and universities. So we weren't setting ourselves up as totally unreasonable, because there, to your point, there aren't as many students from diverse backgrounds and color graduating, but we want to be at that percentage or higher. And forgive me that I don't remember the percentages off the top of my head, but we do have those goals and indicators in Envision 308 on this particular piece.
Well, who do we hold accountable for them getting done, though? That's, I guess, like, are they in somebody's goals? Are they in somebody's, like, evaluations, or, because how does that work then?
So Dr. Sparlin is nodding yes, and I would say that, I mean, I feel like Envision 308 is all of our, even if it's not written in, I want to do everything we can to get Envision 308 accomplished, whether it's directly tied to my goals or not.
Yeah, and just to speak to diverse staff, obviously diverse could mean a lot of different things. It's not just race. It could be your lived experience or your different perspectives. And so, but yes, we do want, you know, more males, and we do want people who look like our student body reflected, but we also know that they could, you know, they can still be of a certain ethnicity, but still reflect and represent something diverse.
Yes.
I know Lori's been waiting, so I'm going to give her a chance.
When I'm looking at your Climate for Learning framework, I'm looking in here at a lot of discussion about creating an environment that will allow children to absorb what you're hoping to better teach them. We're talking about a different kind of books, different opportunities, different styles of teaching, different styles of learning. But then I also heard from our student ambassadors that, whoa, there was a big surprise on the radar in the data that they recovered for what was really hampering student comfort levels in the classroom at our high school level. How are you going to be using this kind of data from our students to adjust what your plans initially had been for this Climate for Learning framework to now address what they've offered?
Yeah. So part of the Climate for Learning piece is having behavioral expectations and having a way to monitor and support them. We need to dive in, obviously, to the sexual harassment issue about, are there rules in place, or is it being proactively taught? How is it being addressed? And all of that supportive discipline piece is built into Climate for Learning. We need to pivot and address a specific issue, but that climate of having everyone feel accepted, having social emotional learning to be able to have confidence, address the data, have a system of discipline and the consequences that go with it, all are part of Climate for Learning. So while I don't think we need a new framework, we just need to zero in on this particular issue and address it through the Climate for Learning. With Tier 1 instruction, what does it look like for staff? What does it look like for students? And then move all of that. So I don't think it requires a redo of all of that. Now that we have new data, we need to jump in and address that. When we look at office referrals and we get to a place that we have a common place in office referrals and it pinpoints whatever it does, we'll have to jump in and address that too.
So, okay, a couple of things. One, how do you ensure and how do you look at, is it just through office referrals and discipline issues that you'll determine whether or not this Climate for Learning framework that you're implementing is taking hold and being successful? Or is there another measure by which you will know that students are feeling comfortable in the classrooms?
Sure. So this survey that we're talking about that was referenced earlier of how to create that, that's something that we're creating and would give over time. Also, doing walkthroughs, it's a very palpable sense when you're in a classroom whether people are feeling comfortable and addressed or not. When we have student ambassadors and they continue to say, is it better or not, I doubt if this is the last survey that this group is going to do, and then we can give similar questions and see whether it has gotten better or not. I think something as complex as a school system or about how students feel, yes, you're going to need to have some data. Yes, it could be surveys, it could be office referrals. I always talk about triangulating data and then adding a narrative on top of it to try to address those pieces, because it is so complex. No one set of data or one set of narrative is going to give you the direction that you need or be able to celebrate that you've gotten where you need to be.
Thank you for answering that. We'll be looking forward to those updates. I guess my only other question, and I've heard a lot of very specific questions on what we could do and what we should do. As a board, it's our job to make sure that the direction that we have set, that we want to go in this Envision 308, is able to be accomplished. What do you need from us to be able to better support staff social emotional well-being? If it's not removing walkthroughs, what can the board provide within our role to be able to make this more likely to occur? Sorry, that's
a lot.
It's a big question.
It's a big question, but that if we want to succeed, I fully believe that as a board we need to not get in the way of that progress through decisions we made. What do we need to do if we are bought in and this Envision 308, and we're looking at data showing we need change? There's nothing clearer in this presentation than that we're not doing good enough. And that's not through lack of hours put in by teachers, and it's not through lack of custodial supplies or support in recess, and it's not through lack of bus drivers. We're trying really, really hard at things that are not helping, and I know that that's what you're trying to change. But as a board, I feel like I'd like to know, I can't be in a classroom and change that. I can talk to a lot of people, but it won't be enough. But what I can do is my job as a board member to give you what you need. So are you looking at things like class sizes, reducing the amount of caseloads? Are you looking at providing more social emotional professionals? Are you looking at more disciplinary professionals? Are you looking at staff numbers? Are we looking at a higher level of education, providing more education for the employees that we do have? What are we looking at for us that we can help with?
So I'll launch some of my opinions, but I think I also would want to talk with
obviously
more
this is more
members
than
of my
like a
team
faith
and
question.
come back.
This is like a whole district thing, but
short term, and I know we're working really hard on it, and it's nobody's fault, but we need the staff that we've been allocated to get. That would cause a lot less staff, and a lot less staff stress, and we're making some inroads on it. We're not the only district, but definitely if people weren't trying to cover 1.5 jobs day after day after day after day, that would alleviate some stress. I think trying to find, and I struggle with it myself, so I'm here, I'm going to ask something of you all where I'm like, I don't even do it very well myself. But I'm better at it than I was 15 years ago. Finding the right balance between patting people on the back and saying, you are great, because that's true. And then holding a common vision and saying, but you got a little something right here. And we need to help you fix that. There is no teacher, I think I'd almost say no teacher, that is saying, today I'm going to teach so that only 62% of my students learn.
Right.
Today, I've decided that even though I have a son and a husband and whatever, I am going to teach so only the girls will understand. But they need professional development. Once I put this data up, and they're like, well, great, Faith, now I have a guilt complex. You know,
Right.
It's that mom thing, you know, like you're always like, oh, I haven't done everything I should have done. But you have to equip the system and equip staff with bits and pieces of things that will do. And then I've seen this happen in districts before. Once you build on success and you have people who get it, that they own that classroom. They are not victims to what comes in the door. It isn't because their parents didn't teach them or this or that. It's the awful feeling that it's really us that can make that impact. But it's that great feeling that it's really us that can make that impact. And trying to find the right piece between building us up, but not saying we're good enough. And that happens conversation by conversation, and it only happens when you have a lot of trust. And I need that sense of trust and assumed positive intent, but continued question more than I need lower class size, more than I need those other pieces. If parents and admin and teachers and community could all have a common vision and say, this is what we're all assuming positive intent, but really get in and dive in and have crucial conversations when we can, that's when the magic happens.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
But I didn't give you the answers you wanted.
No, but those are the answers that there are. I mean, and the answers that there are always more important than the answers anybody wants to hear. But the reality is trust, climate, culture. Dr. Sparlin, I'm going to pivot the rest of this question to you for this, which is, given that what I'm hearing is that trust, climate, culture, these are the most important things. How has our negative budget situation over the last 5 years, where we've reduced administration, we've increased class sizes, we've reduced staff, we've gutted our infrastructure as much as possible to keep bodies in classrooms, how has that negatively or positively impacted where we are at now, a year and a half into a pandemic?
It definitely hasn't helped it positively, that's for sure. It's like you just said, Lori, I mean, when you talk about the administrative piece, we've cut 33% of administration over time, and Faith said it, people are doing jobs of 1.5 people, sometimes more than that. And when you make those type of cuts, it's going to affect the rest of the organization. Now, we had to do what we had to do to get our ship straight financially, which I think in the next couple presentations we're going to see a little bit a brighter picture in regards to the dollars. But I agree with what Faith just said. We need to. There's a lot of variables in this equation of what we need to do. I think it's knowing the data that she just presented is very important, because you have to have a starting point. We're putting in the foundation when we talk about the climate for learning, the literacy framework, the math framework. We're doing those right things, but when you also talk about staffing and you talk about class size, these are also things that we have to consider to make it all come together and gel. So what I'm really looking forward to is the winter fast bridge data, because this data that we just looked at was kids after a pandemic for a year and a half, and they were back in school for 2 weeks, and I'm really looking forward to where are we. I think the winter data will show us a little bit better, clearer snapshot of where we are, what the true opportunity gap or achievement gap looks like, and then allow us to formulate further plans to be successful.
Thank you for that. I just want to make sure that I'm being clear in how I'm asking this, because that was really, really good information. It wasn't quite what I was looking for. I guess if I rephrase it, how do you feel in your position? I've asked what the board can do to support this. How do you feel that your role as a superintendent will support the success of this and start to build this trust, climate, and culture that we're hoping to have?
Dr. Marino and I have had a lot of conversation in regards to this over the last few months. As superintendent, when I became superintendent, I cut the position that I vacated, because that was beginning at the top, leadership by example, and that's what we did. I don't have that person to do what I used to do for the former superintendent when it came to running the daily operations of the district. Faith does an excellent job, but I need her fully concentrated in the area of educational service department and the information that we just provided here. So if you're asking me what type of help I need, then that's an area. But you know what? When we talk about what do I offer?
What are you offering to your employees as we start to talk about rebuilding this trust so that we can have the buy-in to create the better climate?
So what do you offer the employees? Meaning, like our administrators right now? Is that the piece we're talking about? Because
what are maybe I don't even know if this is the right. Maybe I'm just getting off topic. I'm just asking, as a superintendent, what can you do to help this? I know that your job isn't to go into the classroom and tell people how to teach. And
I think I have a lot to do with the climate and culture of the school district, and I think that I need to have the opportunity to be in the schools a whole lot more than I've had. I mean, the last 18 months has been hard, but I need to be back in the schools, building those relationships, working with teachers. I really want to sit down with teachers, almost do a climate, a learning a tour of the school district, just like you would if you would start over again, and to have those conversations with the teachers. And I think a climate survey of our entire school district, asking all stakeholders what's going well, what can we do better, and then to build some plans off of that, I believe will help.
Thank you.
I'm gonna add to this because I think we're also, it's kind of like looking at the forest through the trees and so forth. One of the things, and actually my 9-year-old really was the inspiration for this comment, but he said to me something this weekend that really stopped me in my tracks. And he didn't realize that he was ever going to not be able to walk into a classroom without a mask again. And that was very sad to me. I think the other thing that we need to do is to understand what the metrics need to look like and give our students hope again. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like. But when your 9-year-old thinks that he's going to go to school with a mask on his face for the rest of his under whatever, I don't know, school career, K through 12 career, that's pretty depressing. And I think we need to give our kids hope again. There's never going to be a normal like we had before, but there is going to be a new normal, and we are going to take our masks off at some point. It would be helpful if we could talk about what that looks like and give them that hope again. And if we could start to look forward to, some bright ahead, I think that will help as well. And I think that is weighing heavy on all of us. So I'd like to look at that information in the future.
Mm-hmm. It's like as a future topic of board discussion in open session. Is that what you mean? Say that again? You mean in regard to this information here, or just like as a future topic at a board meeting? Like, as a future topic, we haven't really addressed that, but we're looking at all these things that are going to help both with our assessments and with our student learning and data. One of the things that we haven't addressed is kind of the elephant in the room, and so I'd like to see that. I think that we will see having that hope, we'll see just a lot of positive. I agree that I think that would have a big impact on the social emotional. Yes. For our students and our teachers. Yes.
Okay. Students, how do you feel about that when you hear that sort of thing, and when you talk about what kind of hope? What do you feel that you hear from your fellow students? Is that something that is a major concern that's really just kind of weighing things down, the uncertainty, or is it more feelings of other things? I know it's big, sorry.
I would say, it's a combination of both points that you brought up. I know that from just interactions with, and myself personally, interactions with other students, that does help to have that kind of, like you guys described, hope, or kind of what to look forward to, because there's a lot of dwelling on the past 18 months. Yes. And I would say not an overall looking forward kind of attitude. It's more so getting by kind of attitude. Okay. So yeah, no, I could definitely, and I've heard that from students, that it kind of changed the aspect of what school feels like as we come back to the new normal.
I like what you said about that getting by kind of feel. That's certainly not the climate, I think, that will be conducive to helping with some of these things, especially when everyone's experience has been different. Thank you for sharing that. Did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said, Colton. I feel like sometimes, maybe it's because we're older, as high school students, but I think we're more adapted to change. So I feel like it wasn't some sort of oh my God, the world's ending sort of thing. But you forget about it one moment, and then someone brings it up, right? You'll be going to lunch and you forget your mask when you're going in there, and they're like, take your mask, and you're like, oh yeah, this is what school's like now. It's just kind of a constant reminder. And I totally agree. I think having a little bit of hope that things might go to like some aspect of normal would feel pretty good. I think it might give people a lot of hope because I know the COVID situation, depending on how people are feeling right now, it really affects them differently. It affects them in a really wide range of ways. And I think just kind of telling everyone that it's going to get better eventually at some point, it would feel really good.
Thank you for sharing that.
Can I piggyback? I know we have to move on, but
Yeah,
I think this is very, I think it's important, but I just want to make, I'm digressing slightly, but when we talk about climate for learning, and this dropped on me as we were talking, and we moved past the survey, but I think for an example of out of everything that we're saying, something very heavy dropped on us that 1,326 students, 1,325 students are dealing with sexual harassment. I think one of the things that we can do for climate for learning is to respond immediately to let them know that we see them. And so, you know, it's my recommendation. Of course, we can talk about it as a board, but minimally, we should make a statement stating what is sexual harassment, how we feel about it in our district, and that we will not accept it. And of course, Maureen, you can chime in on that statement, but I think that given that this is something that our students have brought to us, we're talking about climate for, you know, learning. We have 1,300 students that are saying, this is how I feel every day when I come to school. So minimally, as a district and as a board, we have to respond faster, especially to issues like this, because then, as in the conversations that we were having, one of the other main concerns is administration's response to when I feel a certain way. They're saying they don't know how I'm going to respond, which also contributes to the climate. So my recommendation is that we minimally have to make a statement while we're in the process of figuring out the deeper dive into the data and even you know, what we need to do moving forward. I just think we have to do something.
Totally agree. That psychological safe, you can't ask students to learn successfully if they do not feel psychologically safe.
Okay. We do have to move on, but I do appreciate everyone's comments, and I know this is a really important topic, and I'm sure we'll come back to this many times. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, that takes us to let's see, 9.1. Yes, financial statements. Does the board have any questions on what the board has been provided regarding the financial statements? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 9.2. Item 9.2 is the annual tax levy presentation. Our CFO, Dr. Petsky, is going to present to the board this evening. So, Dr. Petsky, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you and good evening, Dr. Sparlin, members of the Board of Education. I really appreciate this opportunity to share some information about the 2021 tax levy. So, for those of you who are new to the levy process, I just wanted to share a couple key ideas, key terms and definitions here. So one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit is PTEL, the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law. Some of you may hear of that referred to as the tax cap. And that just means that our district and the counties that we're in are limited in the tax extension to either CPI or 5%, whatever is lesser. And historically, CPI has been less. So we haven't really come close to that 5% mark. It's been about 3, 2, 2.5. This year is 1.4. So what exactly is CPI? You'll hear us talk about that quite a bit too. CPI just refers to the Consumer Price Index. It's just kind of a measure of the health of the economy based on consumer goods and how those prices are trending. We use the CPI that's published in December. So the CPI we're using now came out December of 20. And in just a couple weeks here, we'll get the CPI that we'll use for next year. And also one of the key terms that we talk about is EAV. So the equalized assessed value, or that's the property wealth of our district. and that's 1/3 of the assessed value of all of the property in our district. And the interesting thing about that is, with the levy, we're asked to file that as a school district the last Tuesday in December. But the EAV that we need to use to determine our property wealth isn't finalized until January, February, or March of the next year. So that's why when they refer to the levy is really an estimate, what we think based on the information that we know at the time, what we're going to be asking for. So the last two terms that we'll talk about here are exactly what is the levy and what is the extension. The levy is simply just how much the taxing body or the school district requests. We often ask for a higher amount than allowed under PTEL in order to make sure that we capture all new property. And we'll take a look at that through this example. So there's the levy, what we ask for, and then there's the extension, which is what we actually receive. The tax extension, what we actually get from actual taxes collected. One of the reasons why we're talking about the levy as it directly relates to the budget, as you recall in my previous presentations, sources of revenue for the district come in the form of federal, state, and local funding. And levying is directly related to property taxes and that local revenue source, of which our district is about 61% of our revenue is from local sources. So here, just real quick, a few factors that are used when we calculate the levy. So the formula is at the top there. You can kind of see we look for a limiting rate. So we use our prior year's extension. What did we get last year from taxes that were collected? And then we multiply that by either 5% or CPI. And then we divide that by the total EAV minus new property. So you can see why that's kind of it's an estimate at this point, because unknown, we don't know everything below that formula. We don't know what the new equalized assessed value is. We can make some estimates and we can check. We don't know what the new property or new construction is in our district. We can estimate, but we won't know. And because we don't know those two things, we don't really know what the limiting tax rate is. The two things that we do know last year's extension, when we levied, we did get $106 million. And we do know the previous year's CPI, which is 1.4. So to estimate, what we do is we take a look at historic EAV and current county estimates. So here's just a chart to show you. We track that. You can see what the EAV was last year. And you can see that the total EAV in 2020 was $2.2 billion. You can take a look at what that EAV was in each of our counties, so Kendall, Will, and Kane. So we keep a list of how that has increased or decreased over the years. And I also listed on there the CPI, so you can kind of see. Remember, we get, from our previous year's extension, we can either get 5% or CPI, whatever is lesser. Well, that kind of shows you what our increases have been over the last few years there. So 1.4, 2.3, 1.9, and so on. The reason the Kendall, Will, and Kane for 2021 are orange, those are currently estimates. So we do have that information we do have the estimated EAVs from Kendall, Will, and Kane counties. But again, they won't have those total numbers until, or the final numbers until January, February, March, after we have to file this. So if our 2021 levy assumptions are exactly right, what are we looking at? And here you can see we've got a little calculator that we use for figuring this out. We've got our consumer price index, which we know, 1.4. We have our total EAV from last year, which was $2.2 billion. But what we don't know are the next few items. What is the estimated new property? We don't know that yet. What is the total estimated EAV for 2021? We don't know that yet. So we're going to make some guesses. And if we're exactly right, if it is $2.4 billion, and if new property is truly $35 million, then we can take that and plug it into the formula. And if you look at the bottom there, our limiting tax rate is 4.5%. So that's the first part of our calculation, determining what is our limiting tax rate. Another important thing on this sheet, and that's one of the reasons why Bob Lewis from PMA is here, is if you look on there, it says that the number of tax levied bond interest or bond issues that are outstanding. There's 9 of those. So I'm going to talk in just a second. We levy for both our operating dollars and we levy for our debt obligation or the bonds that we have outstanding. So I'll talk about that relationship here in just a second. So let's say using that limited tax rate, we take what our previous year's extension was, $106 million, and we plug that information into a formula, and we come up with what we feel our extension will be for next year. And that comes out to about $109 million. The one thing that I'm showing here that I haven't seen in other levy presentations is I want the Board of Education to see, remember when we talked about budgeting and the school district has 9 different funds? We've got like the education fund, the operations and maintenance fund, transportation fund. I wanted you to see how we take that $106 million and actually put that in those funds. So where do we get the revenue to pay teachers for our capital projects, for busing and transportation? So you can kind of see where those dollars are plugged into this levy calculator. But there's one other thing. Notice at the top of this slide, what if our 2021 assumptions are exactly right? If they're exactly right, we should see about $109 million in revenue next year through the levy process. But what if our assumptions aren't quite right? So that's where we follow the truth in taxation law, where that is, we're going to levy or we're going to ask for taxes, but we're going to ask for more since the numbers that we have aren't set in stone yet. They're just estimates. So if you'll notice there in the blue column, I'm asking for $109 million, but I'm going to increase those a little bit just in case our calculations are wrong. How much? Well, less than 5%. So in this total, I'm going to ask for $111 million, which is 4.99% over and beyond what we had. But the truth of the matter is we're really not going to get $111 million. We're going to get what we are legally owed based on the estimates or the final numbers that the assessors and the clerks come up with. So that's this slide here. We are going to put in a 2021 levy request for $111 million, broken up this way, and we expect to get the final numbers once those are firmed up more closer towards 109. So and there's some websites there you can look at for some more information. So that's actually the levy process. But there's one other item I wanted to share with you. And it always comes up, well, wait, what does that mean to the homeowner? And this is where I wanted to just take a couple slides to explain. There's 2 key points here. Number one is for the homeowner, it's that relationship of EAV and tax rate. What do those mean? Do we high tax rates, low tax rates? And then the second thing that we'll talk about as well is the tax rate for our operating fund versus what we have in bond and interest, outstanding debt that we have. So the relationship here is as your property or as our EAV increases or gets higher, the rate, the tax rate actually goes down. What stays constant or the same is our extension, so the money that we will be getting through taxes. So if we hold that as a constant, if the EAV goes down, in order to get that current extension, the tax rates actually go up. So there's always this kind of little seesaw of what the extension is, what the property values are, and what that tax rate is. And I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. But before I do, I wanted to show you this. This is an actual Kendall County home portion of the tax bill, I found a house whose value was $300,000. The last few years when we've talked about the levy process with the Board of Education, we've used homes that are worth about $250,000 to $300,000 to kind of show what does this mean to the taxpayer. So I found a house that was worth $300,000. Its EAV then is 1/3 of that assessed value, so about $100,000. And when I talk tax rates, remember I said our limiting tax rate for the levy was 4.5%. Well, but wait a minute. My taxes aren't 4.5%, they're really 9.4%. And if you look at this bill, you can see, yes, the total tax rate is 9.4%. When I say 4.5, that's just the school's operating levy. So if you look, we've got the Oswego Township, the Village of Oswego. The interesting thing about the tax bill is the school district is the largest taxing body, so it gets a lot of attention. So if you look up there, compared to all of the other taxing bodies, the school district, the tax rate, wait, John, you said the tax rate was 4.5%, and I'm seeing on my tax bill it's 6.4. Where are you getting that number? Well, the 6.4% tax rate is actually, in this tax bill, the operating tax rate was 4.8%, and the bond and interest, the extra money that we levy to pay our outstanding debt, is 1.6%. And this actually works out pretty well. Since the EAV is $100,000, you can pretty much, look at that. The school tax rate is $6,480, of which $4,837 was for the operating levy, and $1,642 was for our outstanding debt. So I think that's an important point for the taxpayers to understand. And that's why Bob Lewis is here today from PMA. He's going to talk about our debt, our outstanding debt. Basically, he's going to talk about that bond and interest tax rate, the 1.6%, and what we're levying for, and when that's going to be paid off, and we will no longer have to levy that 1.6%.
And when you say debt, can we just clarify that the debt you're talking about was for what purpose?
The referendums from 2004 to 2011 when we were building schools, and we also had a couple other issues in there from 2017. So the bonds that we've issued
were
for the referendum.
Buildings.
Correct.
They paid for our buildings.
They paid for our buildings, you got it. And I won't steal Bob's thunder, but he'll talk about how much debt we had and how much debt we have now, and where we look in projecting that into the future. And then the very last thing, what I did is I broke out those numbers to kind of show you how that EAV, property tax EAV seesaw works. But here you can see in 2021, if we have a stable EAV, I said that our limiting tax rate would be 4.5%. But then this next year, in order to pay our $33 million debt payment, we're going to issue a bond and interest tax rate of about 1.4%. So on the tax bill for the school portion of the homeowner's tax bill, you would see a total tax rate of about 5.9%. On a $300,000 home, 1/3 of that is the EAV, so about $94,000. So if you take the $94,000 times 5.9 total tax rate percent, you're looking at about $5,500. Now if your EAV goes up, the tax rate comes down. Notice it went from 4.5 to 4.1%. So now your total tax rate, in addition to the bond and interest tax rate, is now 5.4, so almost 0.5% lower. But your home value is worth more. Your EAV went up 10%. Your home value is now worth $330,000. So you're paying a lower tax rate on a higher EAV because you have more value in the home. So you do have a lower tax rate, but you're still paying a little bit more in taxes because of that value on the home. It's about, I think it was like $72 or so. And now if the EAV goes down, the tax rate goes up. So here you can see your EAV went down, the tax rate went up to 4.9, our bond and interest tax rate went up to 1.5, the total tax rate is about 6.5. But again, you're paying a higher tax rate, but your home is not worth as much as it was. So you're paying a higher tax rate on a smaller EAV, smaller amount, so you just pay a little bit less, in this case about $82 less. So that's kind of a quick little tutorial. I hope it was a little informative for homeowners or for board members. I know that our Finance and Facility Board Committee, Advisory Committee, really wanted to stress that point about our borrowing levy in addition to the operating levy as well. So I hope I did that some justice here. And based on that, I am open to any questions you might have about the levy. Oh, you know what? Forgot two things. Forgot about Dr. Sparlin. Dr. Sparlin had a question here, so I've included 3 slides to show with our projected, our finance projections. And I want to state these are unaudited because I have not gotten the audits back. In about 2 weeks, I'll get the 2021 audit back and I can update these numbers. But the question that was posed to me is, in our normal projections, which typically our levy, we project that we're going to grow about 2%, and with our evidence-based funding, we've been projecting about a 4% increase. So based on those increases, what does our financial picture look like? So I've highlighted in orange here the surplus every year, and that's that middle orange line. So the surplus in 2022 is about $3.4 million. The surplus the next year, 2023, is about $7.5 million, and you can follow that line in our surplus dollars. The reason we're trying to accumulate those surplus dollars is if you follow those lines down to the next orange line, the projected year-end balance, we're trying to raise our fund balance. And here we currently have a fund balance of about $21 million, and we're trying to get that up to about that 25-26%, so we no longer have to issue tax anticipation warrants to cover some of our daily spending. So if we project a typical levy with typical EBF, if you notice in the lower right-hand corner, we're looking at a fund balance of about $68 million. In the next slide, Dr. Sparlin asked, what if we didn't levy for 1 year, just 2023, but our evidence-based funding assumptions of 4% stayed the same? So if we just took 1 year of not levying, follow those numbers across, and in the lower right corner, we're down $12 million in 5 years. We have $12 million less dollars because the accumulating effect of, again, keep in mind the levy is based on our previous year extension. So if we don't collect all of our revenue that we are entitled to through the levy process, that accumulates every year. So just without levying for 1 year, 2023, but then going back to levying like normal, we only have a fund balance of about $56 million. And then Dr. Sparlin asked the doozy, what if you don't levy 1 year and you don't get evidence-based funding for 1 year or an increase of that? Well, following those numbers now, you can see we went from $68 million fund balance in that FY26 to now $40 million fund balance. So we lost about $28 million in reserves and fund balance that we would have otherwise had. So I appreciate Dr. Sparlin giving me this challenge and allowing me to present this to you. Like I said, I look forward when the auditors have our final numbers, really updating this and showing you a little bit more clear picture of some scenarios with our financial future. So on that note, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take any.
Thank you, Dr. Petsky. My only question is, what is our timeline on the levy process? I know there are certain things that have to be done on certain dates.
Yeah, so on December 6th, I'll come back to the board. Between now and December 6th, I'm going to be going back to the assessors to get more accurate assessments, and I'll use their latest numbers and estimates to plug into the calculator, and I don't expect it to change that much. But then the levy needs to be filed with each of our 3 county clerks by the last Tuesday in December, or that's December 28th. So we'll be hand delivering those to make sure that we, the levy is basically our authorization to say, we need you to collect these taxes. And we also need to make sure that we collect our levy for the bond payments for our outstanding debt.
Thank you.
I have I've watched these 5-year projections for at least 5 years now, and I think what gives me so much pause and a little incredulity, but hope, as we talked about earlier, is looking at this slide on 15, looking at, even if we don't count on the state giving us any new funding like they should, even if for whatever reason we chose not to levy, we're looking at a $40 million year-end balance with the budget cutting that we have done in the past. I have looked at these 5-year projections where we were in the negative 10 millions, where we were talking, and for real, for years, have been talking about not having enough money to cover our bills this year. 40, right now we get about 25 million, I think, in tax anticipation warrants, which is basically to cover our cash flow because we don't have it to pay our bills. I'm looking at fiscal year 2024 having enough to maybe not need to do that, and I'm,
which will save us even more money.
I mean, I'm a little in shock, and I've looked at this 3 times now myself, and I love this slide, but it brings about an entirely different phase in what we can look to do for our kids. We've spent the last 5 years taking away. We can, even if we don't get any state extra money, we can still do some things and still have the money that we need to be able to set ourselves right financially. And I am just really impressed at the moment by the fact that we are in this position this year. It's a first for me, and I'm very excited about it.
I appreciate you saying that. I'm getting chills right now thinking about if you're reacting that way to that. Wait till Bob comes up to share where we are with our
and
borrowing.
I've heard this too. I know.
But I appreciate that, because the one thing that we've been talking about too is, like, in education, we're a cost neutral, revenue expenditure. And I think when you start comparing districts, and Eugene and Lori, you guys in our last finance committee, we were talking about when you compare districts, you need to look at our operating tax rate levy, that 4.8% compared to other districts and what they do and what we can do with those revenues. The one thing that costs us more right now is that bond and interest, the tax rate that we've had to do for that.
Paying for our buildings.
Yeah, so it is, do we pay higher tax rate here? We do, but we also borrowed a lot of money since 2004, and we're now seeing, I can't believe 2034 is, we're looking at a whole new picture. Actually in 2027, when we start looking at our first major debt payoff. So I'm excited to have Bob here and really share that picture for you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to say two things that may sound like they're opposites of each other, but I also think it reminds us, though, that we have to remember where we've been. So that doesn't mean we can just go start spending wildly, as Dr. Sparlin's predecessors may have done. So I want to be cognizant of that. But the other thing that we need to do collectively as a district is start to change the narrative that I see over and over in the community, which is District 308's broke, District 308's broke. It affects our realtors, it affects people that want to move into the district, it affects the narrative that we don't have things that other districts have. So I look forward to that narrative kind of moving forward out into the community with these numbers. But also, at some point, it makes me wonder, are we going to have to pay for all of that pandemic relief money that trickles down from the federal government? And knowing that what if EBF is not funded, it gives us a little bit more confidence that we're going to be okay. We hope that we're fully funded, but we also know we haven't been for years. This gets us to a position where we can still take care of our students. So thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
We've needed to see these numbers for a really long time, and we've asked for them. So I know that Allie will agree with me where it's finally nice to see these. Been looking for them for a long time.
It was 5 long years of a lot of hard discussions and a lot of hard work. And but as you can see, 5 years from now, we could be in the best financial situation we have been in this decade.
Yeah.
Actually, in this century.
Ever.
Okay, number 9.3 is our debts. Item 9.3 is debt overview presentation, along with information on debt service extension bonds. We had done this a handful of years ago to pay for our capital projects, and tonight we have Bob Lewis from PMA to present to the board. And Bob, I know when we sat in my office, we went through about a 45-minute presentation. I think you can cut that down by 66.6%.
I'd be happy to. Well, thank you for having me here tonight. And I'm dancing on my screen now here. Okay. Before I delve into the presentation, just want to give you a quick market update. And some of you have already seen this before if you're in the Finance Committee. That the main takeaway from here is you have two data sets. The gray area represents the federal funds rate. Gives you an idea of where monetary policy stood at various times over the last 20 years. And then the lines represent an index in the municipal bond market, which gives you an idea where municipal bond rates have been at over the last 20 years. And from what you can see on the far right side, the municipal bond rates are near historic lows. They have been trending up here a little bit here as of late, reflective of some of the news we've seen with inflation. But from a historical perspective, we're still at some of the lowest rates we've seen in history. The only time they're lower, the all-time low is there in August of 2020, right after the pandemic had started. So let's advance to this next slide, give you an idea of where we've been and where we are at today as it relates to the district's debt profile. The district had implemented a multi-phase restructuring plan to bring down the slope of its debt service and to flatten off the overall payment. The gray area represents what the debt looked like just before the final phase. It had already been adjusted somewhat in the first couple of phases. So in the final phase, those peaks that we saw in 25 and the next successive years were refinanced and brought forward mostly to fill in the valley that was here to create that level overall structure which the district had been trying to achieve for several years. And also in the process of creating the level overall structure, the interest rates were lowered and significant debt service savings were achieved. The overall levies were reduced by an aggregate of $15 million or $11.3 million on a present value basis. This refinancing occurred about a year ago from now. As part of that discussion, the board began to review the options related to non-referendum bonds for capital projects. Because the last non-referendum bond for capital projects was done about 5 years ago, and that's represented, the payments on that are represented by these green bars. And the discussions last year centered around, well, how do we want the blue bars to look so that if the district decides to do another non-referendum bond, how will that non-referendum bond impact the overall payment? Because right now this just reflects your current debt picture, not what it would look like if you did another non-referendum bond. So after much discussion, the board chose an option where we lowered the payment from levy year 19 to levy year 20 for the bills that came out this year, with the intent that if it did do another non-referendum bond, there would be an increase in the overall payment. I have some numbers in a couple slides here what the impact was, but just wanted to review that recent history that occurred last year. So let's look at those new money options that Dr. Pesky has been referring to. Before we delve into the graphical representation, we just have to review one concept that comes out of PTEL, the property tax cap law, which impacted the operating side, which Dr. Pesky just went over in great detail. But there also was an aspect of that law that impacted your ability to do borrowing on a non-referendum basis. Not just your ability, any school district, community college, park district, non-home rule village that are in a tax cap county, they're impacted by this law. So in 1997, when tax caps were voted into Kendall County, they already existed in the other two counties when the tax cap law was originally approved. But in 1997, Kendall County voted in tax caps, and what the law says is whatever an entity was levying for in the year that tax caps came into existence for non-referendum bonds only, not referendum bonds, but non-referendum bonds only, became something called the debt service extension base. And so that creates an annual limit on what the payment can be on your non-referendum bonds. So it's not the amount that you can borrow, it limits the annual payment. That was tied to CPI. So the new debt service extension base is $3,160,000, which is tied to the CPI that came out in January of this year, the 1.4% that you heard about in the last presentation. So that debt service extension base is represented by the red line that you see on slide 8. And you'll notice there's one blue column at the beginning. That's the last payment on those bonds that you did 5 years ago. And the board has the opportunity, if it would choose to do so, to issue another non-referendum bond for capital projects to impact levy year 21 for bills payable in 22. And that deadline to establish that new levy is February 28th of next year. So there's a couple more months that you have on the debt side than you have on the operating side. And then the dashed line, you may be wondering, well, what's that represent? Well, because the DSEB's tied to CPI, that shows what it could be over time if it averaged 1.5%. So this next slide here shows you the scenario that we're presenting here tonight, along with some additional information that hopefully you find valuable. So in this scenario, we did a 6-year debt service extension-based bond that is represented by the green, dark green bars right here, or columns. And you notice those go right up to the red line, which is your debt service extension base. And what is the impact then on the overall debt levy? Well, that raises the debt levy from where it was in 2020, bills payable in 21, and even over what they were in 19, bills paid in 20. Because remember, the board intentionally lowered the levy for 1 year to provide some acknowledgement of the impact that we were feeling as homeowners in the pandemic. So that decrease from 19 to 20 represented about $54 on a $250,000 home. Now, it doesn't mean everybody experienced a $54 reduction in the bill, because there's other things that impact your bill. What it means is your bill, if you own a $250,000 home, would have been $54 higher than whatever it was. If the board chooses to do another non-referendum bond up to the debt service extension base, that would increase bills on a $250,000 home by about $108 from where they were in levy year 20. But if you go back to where they were in levy year 19 before the decision to lower it for 1 year, that would be about a $54 increase. Now, this 6-year borrowing would net proceeds of roughly $17.5 million. The reason I say roughly is because what's paid out of the debt service extension base is not just principal, it's principal and interest. So as interest rates go down, you can get more principal. As interest rates go up, you get less principal. Well, in this analysis, we assumed current market interest rates plus 0.5%. So actually, if you sold them in today's market rates, we would expect that you would net something a little more than $17.5 million. So the other thing that we want to highlight in this picture is that 6-year financing maintains that payment for 6 years, at which time there's a substantial decline in the overall debt levy, which Mr. Petsky, or Dr. Petsky, was referring to a little earlier. And that decline would be about $8.7 million, or about 37 cents of tax rate. So one question that often comes up when board members, committee members see that type of decline in the bond rate, and they naturally want to know, well, can we just move some of that into the operating funds to help fund classroom education? Because people are using what they know as individuals. If you pay down your car, well, it gives you more money in your budget for other purposes. Well, the same thing doesn't work with the tax levy. The levy for the bonds can only be used to pay the bonds, because when the voters authorize that via referendum, they authorize the tax to only pay those bonds. So when the bond levy falls, you can't just move those dollars into the operating funds. Now, a future board has the opportunity to consider, that obviously provides substantial tax relief, but it's also an opportunity, maybe if the board wanted to ask the community, it would be able to put some of that reduction back into the classroom, but only with the approval of the voters at a referendum. So That's not something that is obviously a decision point today, but something that's not too far down the road that does give the district and a future board some options for future decisions. So this is a good news that that ties in with the good news that you're giving on the operating side. So this next slide just gives you the detail, if you're into the numbers, of what goes into the non-referendum bonds. And you can see the blue column would represent the new bond issue, and then the debt service extension base is represented by the second to the right column. And you take the difference between the bond payments and debt service extension base, you can see that's pretty close to zero, meaning you would be utilizing most of that margin that you have available. You may be wondering what your rate would be on this borrowing. Well, the estimate when we ran this back in late October was a 1.78, but that was with the cushion of 0.5% added to it. So I can't predict what rates would be like next year when you would be able to sell these bonds if you choose to proceed, but it's likely to be below 1.5%, which would be probably the lowest rate you borrow that for an issue of that length. So what is the process to go about, and I think this is my last slide. Oh, no, you have a slide here, John. But what's the timeline of the key events if the board chooses to proceed? Because there's 3 different items that the board has to do in order to gain authorization to sell bonds. The first would begin with the passage of what's called a notice of intent resolution, and that's to issue working cash bonds in an amount not to exceed X. X would probably be around $18 million, not that you get $18 million, but we want to be somewhere around 17.5, 17.6, 17.4. But you can't go more than whatever you approve. You can always go less. Now you may be wondering, where does this term working cash bonds come from? It's because, remember, the DSEB, the debt service extension base, it's a tax cap concept. You then have to go to school code and say, what type of non-referendum bonds are we permitted to sell? Most school districts sell working cash bonds payable from your DSEB. And the working cash bonds get deposited in the working cash fund, and then they get abated over to the capital projects fund for those projects. Also, what would occur perhaps as early as December 6th is the board president signing an order calling for a bond hearing, or binding hearing as we call it. Both those documents separately get published in the paper. The notice of intent we estimate would be published around December 8th. That kicks off the 30-day petition period in which 10% or more of the registered voters sign a petition, then that bond issue would have to go to referendum. The order calling for the hearing wouldn't get published to the 13th because the hearing has to occur within 7 to 30 days from publication. So your next board meeting wouldn't be to January 10th, so that's why there's a slight difference in the publication dates. We estimate the petition period in on January 7th, assuming it got published on the 8th. We would have to refresh your credit rating. Credit rating is provided by, for your case, by Moody's Investor Service, just like we have our own individual credit scores that determine the rate that you will borrow at. This determines the rate that you would borrow at. The third and last item that the board would have to do is approve what's called a parameters resolution authorizing the sale. So that would set the not to exceed principal amount, not to exceed term, 6 years, not to exceed interest rate. And that names delegates to approve the sale, delegates of the board, which typically are the board president and the assistant superintendent of finance or the superintendent. And the reason we do that is just provide the flexibility to enter the market on a date that makes sense, not the date of a board meeting, which may not make sense. Because there could be certain economic reports that come out that day, for example. And then the bonds would be sold on the 25th, as early as the 25th, with the closing on the 22nd, which is a date that you would receive the proceeds, and the bonds would then come into existence. And you would meet the filing deadline then of February 28th. So, John, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you here.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And just this, I know we started talking about our outstanding debt and then our new revenue opportunities, but one question that's come up is, and it's been a matter of timing. In a perfect world, I wish we could have had the new facility master plan done, completed, and show you what that would cost and what that would look like over time. But what we do have is the deferred maintenance plan that we did issue DSEB dollars for to fund. And we ended up selling about $14 million. So what I've got listed here is just for you to take a look at. There's each of our schools, and you can see priority one in that last plan, we had about $13 million. In priority twos, we had about $11 million worth of projects, and in priority three, which was a little bit lower priority or perhaps some improvements to the schools, we had about $4 million. So we had about $29 million worth of projects, and with the sale of the DSEB dollars in 2015, we were able to spend $10 million on those projects, and then we also were able to use $4 million for technology improvements as well. So I think one interesting thing to look at here is two. We've got about $19 million worth of deferred maintenance projects that we were not able to complete that are still outstanding. But also, if you even just look at the priority ones, what we had that first year, we have $13 million, almost more money than we were able to sell in just priority one projects. So Rob is here tonight too, and he's been working really hard on, in addition to the deferred maintenance plan, what are some of the projects that we took a look at every school, and we're looking at like athletic fields and playgrounds and kitchen equipment, and what are other projects that are needing to be addressed in addition to what was not done in the Vision 2020 deferred maintenance plan. And so far, Rob is up to about $15 million in just projects that he himself has been able to identify. So with that said, we know when we do this engagement with Kluber and our new facility master's plan that we are going to be looking at quite a few capital needs, capital improvement projects. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there and allow the board to ask some questions of Bob, Lewis, myself, and put that information out there.
Well, Bob, Dr. Petsky, thank you so much for that presentation. Board, what questions do you have for these two gentlemen?
I only have one. In one of the earlier slides, you'd showed the end of the debt service payment being around year 2020 or 2034 or 5.
34.
And then in slide 9, it was 2037, 2038. So can you explain that change?
Well, I think what's happened there is a formatting error.
Yeah, that's what I was assuming,
all
but
the
I
years
just
have
wanted
been crunched.
Yeah, I think you're right about that too. I just wanted to make sure that we had at least acknowledged that that's not actually a change with DSEB out to 2037, 2038 in the debt service extension.
Yeah, there's no change on that.
Okay, that's what I figured. Thank you so much.
I don't know why that did that. It's just an image from Excel. But
So Dr. Petsky, are we going to have to move forward with it? I'm tired, so I apologize.
No, you're okay.
Move forward with approving this before we when do we expect the maintenance facility plan?
You know, we've just got the invitation, so we're starting the narratives the end of November, beginning of December with all of the buildings. But in order to do the assessment, we're looking at about February to March before we get that final product to the board. So that's why I wanted to put this in there to kind of show you that, you know, we do have information on where we were with just deferred maintenance. We already, you know, Rob already has a list of projects that he's got in addition to this, and that's without even the architects going in and doing an official assessment. I think it's important for the board to realize too, when we talk about DSEB, this is kind of a new idea for this board for this district, because prior to this, where we got money to do capital projects was from the referendum bonds. When we sold bonds to build schools, we also recognized we had capital improvement projects to do. But then we stopped doing that, And then we needed some capital dollars to continue to fund the projects we had. So that's when the board in 2015 sold their DSEB bonds, and we're kind of in that same area where we have capital needs, but we don't have referendum dollars to meet that expense. So
the only comment I'll make based on the conversation that we had quite extensively during the facilities and finance meeting is that we show that there's $19 million in projects that were not completed from the last plan, and this DSEB would only net us about $17 million. And many of our buildings are 20 to 25 years old, and so we're not even talking about or considering the critical failures that could happen to some of our mechanicals in the buildings. And so that, when I say critical failures to the mechanicals, we talked about boilers, chillers, the roofs, parking lots, etc. And so when we think about our own homes, we always want to have that nest egg set aside for that emergency. And so if we did not do this, we would have to tap into operational funds in order to fund it, and we just don't have it operationally. So we just wanted to make sure that everybody, the community, understood the importance of having the ability to not only take care of what's already that what we have not done, which is 19 million, but also just making sure that we can position ourselves that if an emergency occurred, we would be in a position to take care of it.
And I'll just piggyback off of that, that the things that were priority 3 and didn't even make the list in 2014, 2015, because time passes, now have to become priority 1, and that also, that $10 million also doesn't encompass the emergencies that we've already had, because that's actually happened more than once already because we've stretched stuff. So I would be really shocked if we came in under 17 million with what we need to do to our buildings. That's not want to do, that's need to do.
Need to do.
Well, and from 2020 that we didn't finish and we're going into 2022, that 2 million is compounding.
Right.
That we haven't been addressing. It's just getting worse.
Yes.
So,
and
yeah.
and those were, that's, Rob's probably itching and scratching right now, so I'll speak for him.
I don't see any itching or scratching in Rob's defense.
But
come on, Rob.
To Rob has been making it very clear to me, the last time we went out to bid, we expected it to come back on some some chillers and boilers about 700,000, and the bid came back 1.2 million, almost twice as much. So the other thing is, you're talking about critical failures, and this plan is predicated based on projections that were done in 2015 to what current dollars were. We don't know until we go to bid if that is 19 million or more based on current COVID crises. And we had the option to delay a little bit, but now we're getting to the point where critical failure is definitely a reality.
And this, Rob, I'll let you talk, but this goes back to all of this stuff is also a part of the climate and culture of our buildings and our students learning. When our Boulder Hill kids didn't have heat or didn't have air this summer, that affects their learning ability. Sorry.
Right, climate for learning is a whole different world for me.
Right.
But also a sidebar note on costs. We have seen unprecedented cost increases because of COVID. The 15 some odd million dollars we got with the last DSEB will not go as far in the next 2 to 5 years as it did.
Rob, in my industry, I know there are a lot of also product shortages because of COVID and silicone chips and all this stuff. Are you seeing the same kind of things, and it's difficult to get your hands on items that we need?
The biggest problem is shipping delays. Availability is problematic. We're able to keep ahead of the curve on our consumables, but when you talk about HVAC parts, they're hard to come by, and it takes longer for the manufacturing process to get the parts we need and get them on the shelf.
Right.
I have one last question, I promise, where I want to go to bed. The technology, does that represent the numbers that we got for for COVID from, okay. So this is above and beyond. Okay, thank you.
This was things like upgrading the telephone lines. This was way back.
Okay.
And
And
adding.
I mean one-to-one, like getting.
Oh, no.
Okay, so none of that has
This
anything
was,
to do.
this was
okay.
servers and switches and
Yeah.
more
Okay.
infrastructure, not so much student devices.
Okay, thank you.
No, that was 20 million extra.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, for sticking around the entire meeting. And
Right.
I'm talking over. I know you can't tell who's talking because we have our masks on, but we appreciate you being here tonight and presenting this in a way that is at least relatively understandable. So it's a lot of number speak. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So the
You too, Rob.
the $108 a year for our taxpayers, for how long?
Those 6 years.
But I would caution all of us that people still need to be able to afford to live here. So as much as I could appreciate all the money that we need to spend, we also have people in this community who don't have kids in this building, in these buildings, or grandkids in these buildings who still need to live here.
I would argue they also probably had kids or grandkids in the buildings back when we had to build all the buildings.
Which I can appreciate, and they were also probably not on fixed incomes at that point.
Yeah, that's totally true.
Are there any more questions on this topic? Everyone's good. I just wanted to check in with everyone because we're on 4 hours now. Does anybody need a 5-minute recess?
No, we need to go.
Okay, I'm just checking.
Thanks for
trying to
asking.
take care of you people.
All right. Item 9.4 is the first reading on board policies that are in need of updating. The policies that are being presented to the board this evening have gone through the board's policy committee and are being brought forth as a first read prior to board action. Does the board have any questions on what has been brought forward this evening?
Well, I think we know LaTanya has requested for 5:10 to be reviewed.
Actually, it's on the agenda for the December 13th Board Policy Committee meeting, and it
Okay.
can also go to the other
Equity?
committee but I would recommend that you contemplate, there's a minor change in here that you
Okay.
could, on first read and then second read, approve, and then future consideration of anything else.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any questions on the policies that have been presented? All right, that takes us to action items, Dr. Moreno.
Okay. I didn't know that one was going to be so quick. All right. Okay. Sorry. So 10.1, approval of bills for payment. Can I get a motion for the approval of bills for payment?
I make a motion to authorize the payment of bills in the amount of $4,740,860.27 as presented.
Latanya seconds.
Second. Mrs. Croner?
Aye.
Dr. Marino?
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood?
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson?
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle?
Aye.
Mrs. Simulton?
Aye.
10.2, can I have a motion to approve the 2022 to 23 school calendar, please?
I make a motion to approve the 2022-2023 school calendar as presented.
Second. Let's go.
Mr. Gatewood?
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson?
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle?
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson?
Aye.
Dr. Marino?
Aye.
Mrs. Simulton?
Aye.
Mrs. Croner?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. 10.3, can I have a motion to approve the proposed new high school courses, please?
I make a motion to approve the proposed new high school courses for the 2022-2023 school year.
Second.
Mrs. Doyle?
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson?
Aye.
Mrs. Croner?
Aye.
Mrs. Simulton?
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood?
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson?
Aye.
Dr. Marino?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. 10.4, approval of superintendent contract. Can I have a motion to approve the superintendent contract, please?
I make a motion to approve the superintendent's contract as discussed and presented.
Second.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson,
No.
Mr. Gatewood,
Just want to make a quick statement. I do support the superintendent, and I'm willing to provide an extension. However, due to some terms in the contract, I'm going to have to say no.
Dr. Marino,
Aye.
Mrs. Simulton.
I'm going to say no due to the terms and conditions of the contract.
Motion passes 4-3. 10.5, approval of building administrator contract. Can I have a motion to approve the building administrator contract, please?
I make a motion to approve the building administrator contract as presented.
Second.
Mr. Gatewood,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson,
Aye.
Mrs. Simulton,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Dr. Marino,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. 10.6, approval of personnel report. Can I have a motion to approve the personnel report, please?
I make a motion to approve the personnel report as presented.
Second.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson,
Aye.
Dr. Marino,
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Mrs. Simulton.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.